Honourable members, the Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? I call the member for McEwen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I rose in this chamber last week to call to the House's attention one of my constituents, 16-year-old boy named Harvey McKeever, who was an NDIS participant. Harvey became a quadriplegic in February of this year after a motorcycle accident on the family farm. He spent 6 months in hospital and finally returned home in September. Harvey requires significant rehabilitation and round-the-clock care in order to maintain his health. When I spoke to the House regarding Harvey's struggles with receiving adequate care and assistance from the NDIS, Harvey was awaiting the result of his fourth NDIS internal review. The NDIS has repeatedly denied requests from Harvey and his family regarding the items necessary for his health, care and physical well-being. These include an electric stimulation bike that the Royal Children's Hospital has deemed essential for Harvey's health. Today, Harvey's mum, Renee, informed my office that their fourth internal review had been unsuccessful. And of all the requests that have been denied, after 4 internal reviews, countless reports and recommendations, Harvey and his family are being left in the same uncomfortable position with the same inadequate level of care that they were requesting a review of. Harvey, his mum Renee and their entire family want nothing more than for Harvey to live comfortably at home and for his health to be maintained and for him to maintain the dignity that he deserves. It is exactly the purpose for which the NDIS was created. Sadly, this Morrison government has ripped the NDIS apart. The NDIS now seems incapable of fulfilling its most basic purpose. Harvey and his family, after 4 internal reviews, have already been completed and now being asked to complete a new set of independent assessments. The relevance and the necessity of this are just not clear. So I call on the hapless minister and the CEO of the NDIS to consider very carefully whether they are fulfilling the burdens of their roles correctly and properly. Because the way it looks to me and the way it looks to Harvey and his family and to the way it looks to our electorate and the way it looks to Australian people is that the minister and the CEO have both failed to do their jobs. No minister with any ounce of integrity would allow this to happen on their watch. The minister has failed in her job, failed Australians living with disabilities, and if she had any decency, she would get on the phone and sort this now or resign. The NDIS is routinely wasting vast sums of taxpayer money by requesting more reports again and again, not just for Harvey, but for so many who have contacted my office. Australians with disabilities are being forced to navigate drawn-out, bureaucratic and ineffective processes. The Morrison government's stance on compulsory and independent assessments and the new God power provisions are an absolute disgrace. Harvey and his family must now request a 5th internal interview. I mean, how much does this government want them to bear? If it's unsuccessful, they'll have to take their matter to the AAT. The NDIS needs urgent reform, and on this issue, the Morrison government has failed miserably. Only an Albanese Labor government can be trusted to reform the NDIS and support Australians living with disability.
The member's time has expired. I call the member for Bradfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to acknowledge and celebrate the efforts by so many across my electorate in Bradfield in responding to the extraordinary challenge of the pandemic throughout 2021. I first want to acknowledge so many people across the electorate who rolled up their sleeves and went to get vaccinated at the earliest possible opportunity. I'm very proud of the fact that by early November this year, 3 local government areas, wholly or partly within my electorate, Hornsby, Ku-ring-gai and Willoughby, had all exceeded 90% double dose rates. Of course, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of our local healthcare professionals in so many ways. Can I acknowledge Dr Heremanek and her team at the Roseville Vaccination Centre, where I personally was pleased to have 2 AstraZeneca shots, and I know that many others in the electorate of Bradfield were pleased to be vaccinated at facilities and pharmacies and doctors' surgeries throughout the electorate. Can I acknowledge particularly Helen and Sabina at Linfield Pharmacy, Kelly at Taylor's Pharmacy in Turramurra, and of course all of the other pharmacists and GPs across the electorate. Can I acknowledge our hospitals and substantial institutions, particularly the SAN in Wahroonga and Hornsby Ku-ring-gai Hospital? People in Bradfield can be very confident about the quality of medical care available to them at these widely respected institutions. Can I acknowledge our teachers and students who kept going through this very difficult period? I was struck one day when I joined 2 classes online, a Year 9 science class at St Ives High and a Year 11 class at Barker College, at the way both the teacher and the students were interacting, getting on with their work in the unusual circumstances of doing it over Zoom. Can I thank all of the ancillary and other services that perform such a vital role? Meals on Wheels, Ku-ring-gai Hornsby, continue to operate throughout the pandemic, ensuring that freshly cooked meals were delivered to senior Australians across the electorate in a COVID-safe manner. And I want to thank manager Nick Udale and his team of volunteers. They've delivered over 100,000 meals this year. Can I thank our local SES units who have been there on standby when needed to deal with emergencies and challenges. 2021 has been a very difficult year, but across Australia and certainly in my electorate of Bradfield, Australians have responded magnificently. We've got through this period of adversity, and I say thank you to all Australians and particularly those in my electorate of Bradfield.
I call the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, mateship, unity, honesty, fairness and honour, a healthy dose of cheek, an infallible radar for bulldust. These are the values that define us as a country and as a people. Most of all, we are a country built on community. We have always been able to count on each other in times of conflict, during fire, flood and other natural disasters. Whenever there is hardship, Australians have come together. Our volunteers in every field, emergency services, charities, CWAs, agricultural societies, sports groups and so many more have always been awe-inspiring. Over the past 2 years, we've seen landlords support their tenants and employers support their workers. But it's a fact that our communities have shown the leadership that our federal government has not. We are all acquainted with the failures of the past 2 years, the failure to secure vaccines, which caused a late rollout, the ongoing failure to provide purpose-built national quarantine centres, which leaves us exposed to continued breakouts and lockdowns. But the failures are bigger and go much deeper. This is a federal government that is rotten to its core and whose disease threatens to infect our national character. It is a government that is destroying our traditions and our institutions, a government that has declared war on the ABC, on universities, on anyone who disagrees with it. We have a federal government that constantly seeks to divide Australians, not bring us together. A government that engages in rorts and scandals, a government that lies and tells us it's all just politics as usual, that the end justifies the means, that political victory is all that counts, no matter the cost to our national identity and the values we treasure. Leading this government is a Prime Minister who has proved time and again from his own actions and his own words he cannot be trusted. His promises mean nothing. They are empty things set only to earn a headline to be discarded the next day. A Prime Minister who cannot be trusted to tell the truth, the people that he has the privilege to serve. This is not who we are. We are a people who know that our word should be as good as our bond. I reject this Prime Minister's trashing of our reputation for trust, mateship, unity, honesty, fairness and honour. These are not the values I see in the words and deeds of this Prime Minister. Early next year, Australians face a choice. On one side, a man who has proven time and again his unsuitability for office, who refuses to act on allegations of corruption, who never fails to live up to the expectations of the Australian people. And on the other side, the Leader of the Opposition, Anthony Albanese. The choice is easy, Albanese. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And I call the member for Parkes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. A few years ago, the federal government contributed $10 million towards a small animals abattoir at Bourke in the northern western part of my electorate. It was under the round two of the federal government's National Stronger Regions Fund, which is a forerunner of the Building Better Regions Fund. It was $10 million in partnership with the Burke Shire Council to help them with some of the enabling infrastructure, roads, electricity, water supply, as part of a $61 million project. Sadly, upon completion, the abattoir shortly closed because of the issues around the drought and other issues, and it's sat there idle now for a number of years, and it's been very disappointing to the people of Burke and the western region of New South Wales. Anyway, a bit of good news, Madam Deputy Speaker, in that just recently Thomas Foods have purchased the abattoir. They've committed to upgrading, putting more processing facilities in, and hopefully early 2022 we'll be back in production, killing 6,000 animals a day, either goats or sheep, and providing 120 permanent jobs. And when I speak to some of the older folk in Burke, some of the Aboriginal folk in Burke who used to work at the Tancred's abattoir, which has closed down many years ago, they would lament that Burke was a much more stable and prosperous town when it had that employment on the edge of town. And so I'm incredibly pleased that Thomas Foods have stepped up to take this on. I know the people of Burke and Brewarrina and surrounding areas are very excited to have those jobs. It'll be a combination of training local people, probably bringing some skilled workers in, certainly at the start to get the plant going. But to be able to have stable work in your own town is incredibly important. And meat workers, a bit like timber workers or shearers or other jobs, there's an enormous sense of pride in someone that can say that they are actually a meat worker. And my hope is that over the coming years and decades that culture becomes entrenched in Burke and the town will grow and prosper from this investment.
And I call the member for Joe Bell.
Deputy Speaker, just like last year, 2021 has been incredibly tough for school students in my community on the Central Coast of New South Wales. They faced an extended lockdown in the middle of their school year because of COVID-19, which interrupted their studies and face-to-face learning. Many of them had to cope with learning from home again, not being able to see their friends, missing out on weekend sport and other activities, and not being able to celebrate milestone occasions like graduations. This has taken its toll, but just like last year, young coasties were up to the challenge. They encouraged each other, they pushed through the tough times together. And after everything they've been through, it's important to recognise their resilience and their achievements. This year's Dobell Awards again recognise students who have gone above and beyond throughout the school year. Deputy Speaker, students like Shari Martin from Holgate Public School. Shari is receiving the Dobell Award this year for her commitment and leadership in school parliament, her positive behaviour and always demonstrating school values. Tamsin Mad from Wadalba Community School is being recognised with the Dobell Award for being an outstanding student leader and a great contributor to her school community. Bailey Hodges, also from Wadalba Community School, is receiving the Dobell Award for coaching and officiating community sport. He has also assisted with feeder school carnivals and trials for the past 4 years with great reviews. Then there's Ari Harris from Blue Haven Public School. She's being recognised with a Dobell Award for her contribution to the school environment and assisting with maintaining the school vegetable gardens throughout the entire year. Ashelina Jessup from Gorican Public School is a caring and cooperative student who's being recognised with the Dobell Award for her school community service and helping out fellow students and teachers. Sienna Keenan from Wamberal Public School has made significant contributions to the school this year, both academically, socially and culturally. Sienna is being recognised with the Dobell Award for demonstrating strong leadership skills and is an exceptional role model to other students. Sibu Lili Ives from Tacoma Public School is also being recognised with the Dobell Award for her contributions to the school and the wider community. Ryan Griffey from Tuggerah Lake Secondary College is receiving a Dobell Award for excellence in iCreate. Amelia Ormsby from MacKillop Catholic College, Warnervale, is being recognised for her work in the youth ministry and important fundraising initiatives like Mini Vinnies and annual sleepouts. Evie Rook from Brook Avenue Public School is receiving a Dobell Award for demonstrating outstanding effort in lifting the school spirit of her fellow students during this year's lockdown. And Wade Campbell and Xavier Straker from Hopetown School have both been recognised with Dobell Awards for being a positive influence in their school community. These are all incredible achievements and I congratulate you all. Now, as the school year draws to a close, I'd like to thank all the teachers, principals, parents, carers who have worked so hard to support our students over the past 12 months. You've kept them motivated when times are tough and you made sure they stayed on track with their learning. Our students couldn't do it without your support. So on behalf of all Coasties, thank you for your efforts and congratulations again to the recipients of this year's Dobell Awards.
I thank the member for Dobell and I call the member for Nichols.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. My issue that I wish to raise this afternoon has to do with the supply of timber in Australia, and certainly that in Victoria and Western Australia. Court injunctions and industry uncertainty in Victoria, driven by the state Labor government, moving early to limit access to timber, a decade ahead of its 2030 ban on native timber harvesting, is already stopping the supply of new logs. We are now faced with the absurd situation where serious disruptions not only to the building industry but the entire supply chain, and is even going down now to wooden pallets, which are making exports unavailable simply because we cannot use the forklifts to pick up our produce. So this disruption is really going to have an incredible problem. Obviously, the state Labor government in Victoria has caved into Green pressure by banning native logging forests from 2024. That's in Western Australia. But Australia's total imports of products continues to increase. So whilst we have the opportunity to be self-sufficient here in Australia when it comes to timber products, we choose not to be self-sufficient. We've put these ridiculous bans on using our own forests in a sustainable manner, where possibly the most highly regulated forests for sustainable harvesting, thinnings. We put a ban through that, and we then have to go and import to look after the demand of timber into Australia, into Victoria. So we've got a huge demand of housing. Housing has risen by about 22%. We've got a huge demand for timber and furniture products. We have the capacity to do it ourselves and become self-sustaining. And in Victoria, with the Labor government, Daniel Andrews' government, we are choosing not to do that. So the consequences of us not doing that is that we have to import this timber from countries that have heavily unregulated timber harvesting agendas. So what happens now? We used to get most of our wood from New Zealand and Canada. We now get most of our wood timber products from China. And of course, China don't use their own forests. China go and get their timber products from Russia. China get their products from Brazil, and China get their products from Indonesia, which they on-sell to Australia. So when we go to Bunnings and we get these timber products, and we have the capacity to provide all of this housing, all of this furniture, we have the capacity to do it all ourselves here in Australia using the most sustainable practices. We are choosing not to do that. We're choosing to go and rape some other forest in Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil. We are tending to do.
Nichols should withdraw that remark.
Withdraw that remark. We are tending to go and pillage all these other forests in countries that have very little regulation and simply having a net negative environmental project.
And I call the member for Maribyrnong.
Good afternoon, Deputy Speaker. It's lovely to be in the Federation Chamber talking about my electorate of Maribyrnong. It's a great part of Australia, the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne. It encompasses fantastic suburbs, including Moonee Valley and parts of the city of Maribyrnong, and also in the future, Kensington and Gladstone Park, Tullamarine and Melbourne Airport. So every Member of Parliament, when they visit Melbourne, the first place they visit is my electorate. But what makes these suburbs great is not their locale, but it's the communities within them. I just want to briefly inform members in the Federation Chamber of the fantastic grants which have been received for local community work and the meritorious proposals. And I want to congratulate the Moonee Valley Toy Library, the Moonee Valley Brass, the Essendon Hockey Club, the Maribyrnong Park Sports Club, the Avondale Heights Community Garden, the Moonee Ponds Bowls Club, the Trieste Club in Essendon, the Strathmore Sports Club, the Essendon Rowing Club, the Strathmore Bowls Club, St John's Ambulance Moonee Valley doing great work, the Hispano-American Centre for Family Support. There's the first Miliara Scouts, the East Keilor Sustainability Group, the Northern Obedience Dog Club, where I was an imperfect attender myself in previous years training my bulldogs, who are more trainable than I am a trainer. The Strathmore Men's Shed, the Farnham Street Community Education, come along and train my dogs, member for North Sydney. You probably do better than me. The Maribyrnong Park, St Mary's Cricket Club, St Columba's College, the Ascot Vale Primary School. All of these groups that I've run through, amongst many other local community organisations, have put forward tremendous economical ideas to improve the community contribution and the community capital of my local electorate. From the replacing of toys at the toy library, the music stands, the hockey stands, the water drinking fountains, AV systems, you name it. My local community is made up of very hard-working groups and volunteers. All of those groups I mentioned have put forward very meritorious proposals, which we're supporting to have their grants finalised. The wealth of the community isn't just in the value of its property, it's not just the view, it's not just the incomes of its citizens. The wealth and the capital of a community is made up of the social networks. We found during COVID that we need to rely on our local communities more than ever. We've been reminded what makes a great community isn't just the houses or the streets, it's the people who live within them. I respect tremendously the volunteers and the committees of these groups and all of the groups in my electorate. They make Maribyrnong not the best place in the world, but a place that is not bettered anywhere
The member's
else.
time has expired. I call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This Saturday, most residents of New South Wales will be heading to the polling booths for our local government elections, and as always, they are hard-fought, occasionally civil, occasionally not, but bring a passion for local communities that are typical of local government. I myself had the great privilege of serving for 2 terms on North Sydney Council, and it was a privilege because it is a level of government that involves working perhaps closest with residents on issues that affect them extraordinarily directly. Today, I don't want to comment on what will happen on Saturday, but I do want to comment about some of those councillors who have decided not to recontest election. And I want to thank, on behalf of my entire community, them for their service, because many people don't realise this, but councillors are effectively volunteers. They get a very tiny stipend for their service. I want to start with the 2 mayors in my electorate who are retiring from office. And I want to start with the Mayor of Willoughby City Council, Gail Giles-Gidney, who has done an exemplary job as the Mayor of such an important area in our city. I've had the pleasure of working with Gail during my time as the federal member, and it has been a pleasure doing so. She has brought a real and genuine commitment to Willoughby, to one of the most diverse council areas in our community, and I see that in the practical achievements that the council has been able to deliver under her leadership. I also want to acknowledge the outgoing Mayor of Lane Cove, Pam Palmer. Pam and I also have worked together on many projects to benefit our local community. I particularly think of things like the Lane Cove swimming pool, which is at risk of falling into the oval below it, and we secured federal funds to support council to rebuild that, and many other projects for the local community. Pam and I have spent the last 3 months with a regular date on Fridays doing Zoom citizenship ceremonies, and I've seen the warmth and genuine commitment that she brings to those tasks and working with residents. And to Pam, thank you for your service to Lane Cove. There are, of course, many, many councillors that have decided not to recontest, and unfortunately I don't have time to mention all of them. But I will mention a couple I know extremely well. So people like Tony Mustaka, Judith Rutherford, who's provided incredible service on Willoughby, in fact, for over 20 years. Christine Chuen, I think the first person of Taiwanese heritage on Willoughby City Council. In North Sydney, the Deputy Mayor, Cathy Brodie, is not standing again. And at the other end of the spectrum, I think probably their youngest councillor ever, Sam Gunning, is retiring as well. And in Lane Cove, I wanted to mention Carola Brent, who I know well, particularly through her incredible support for the local arts community. They have been 5 representatives. Some have been Liberals, some have been not, but I do know that they've been genuinely committed to working for residents and our community. And for that, I say thank you and wish you all the best in your next endeavours, so long as they're not standing for federal parliament.
And I call the member for Corio.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the past 2 years, the thought of an upcoming COVID normal summer is a refreshing prospect. Let's hope that Omicron allows that. From bushfires that raged through the country during the Black Summer of 2020 to the spread of COVID-19, as a nation, we've faced extraordinary challenges over the last 2 years. 2021 was meant to be defined by our recovery from the devastation of 2020. However, with an initial slow vaccine rollout, 2021 was instead another year which, for the most part, was played out as we sat behind virtual screens. As I reflect on the past year through all the challenges, I've witnessed extraordinary acts from individuals and businesses in our community. It is a remarkable collective achievement that we now have more than 90% of the state of Victoria fully vaccinated. And this wouldn't have been possible without our healthcare workers, particularly at Barwon Health, so to them I say thank you. Because of everyone's efforts, we can truly get back onto the task of building back from COVID as we look to 2022. I really thought that in my lifetime the most significant event I would live through would be the September 11 attacks that we commemorated a couple of months ago, the 20th anniversary of those. But I feel now that the pandemic really has eclipsed this. It's completely reshaped the way we live our lives. It's also provided us with the single biggest moment, though, to reimagine our country since the end of the Second World War. And the question is whether we will take this opportunity and put our country on a path to greater prosperity. We need to start by reimagining our localities, and somebody who did this in Geelong with vision was Frank Costa. Our town will dearly miss Frank and his passion for Geelong. We lost this year Geelong's leading citizen. His stature was built on the strength of his values. He gathered good people around the table and drove solutions to better our region. With collective passion and drive to bring Geelong back to life after the pandemic, we can take lessons from Frank's values of leaving no one behind and look to our next wave of opportunities. And one example of those is Care Essentials, a manufacturer of medical supplies in North Geelong. This year they received an Austrade Australian Export Award. Prior to the pandemic, Care Essentials manufactured patient warming blankets. When the demand for PPE grew, they commenced making face masks. Their quick pivot and capability was innovative and created new jobs for our region. We can do more of this. The prospect of 2022 in the context of the past 2 years is really exciting. I think everyone in Victoria feels that. And so, with optimism for the future, I would like to take this opportunity to wish everyone in Geelong a safe and happy festive season.
And I call the member for Page.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the Red Rock Corindi Surf Lifesaving Club, who this weekend are celebrating their 30th birthday. I want to congratulate all the members and the current executive, and in acknowledging the current executive, I acknowledge the executive over the last 30 years. Current executive includes President Wayne Willie Scott, Vice President Phil Malloy, Secretary Anna Clark, Treasurer Ray Pascoe, Club Captain Greg Sunderland, Registrar Kath Malloy, Chief Training Officer Mark Yeager, the Delegate to the North Coast Branch Matane Downey, Radio Officer Sean Connolly, Junior Activities Officer Rebecca Yeager, Junior Club Captain Aidan Connolly, First Aid Officer Kerry Ann Fowler, IRB Captain Robbie Fowler, Gear Steward, WHS Officer, COVID Officer and Offsite Caretaker Ian Bryan, and Social Medias Officer Angela Davies, and Member Protection Officers Glenn Eddy and Anna Clark. I congratulate everyone. I know you're going to have a fantastic night, and I thank you all for the volunteer work you do for our community. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Travis Dew from Casino. Travis has been racing go-karts from the age of 7, and he is quite the legend at the Lismore Kart Club. In June, Travis won the Rotax Micromax Queensland Championship and recently placed second in the New South Wales Championship. This year, he was chosen for the Casino RSM School Sporting Scholarship, and in December, Travis will be travelling to Bahrain to compete at the 2021 Rotax World Finals. He'll be competing against other entrants from all over the world and is the only entrant to represent Australia in his class. His grandfather Warren will be travelling with him for the 10-day event, while Mum Casey and Dad Trent will be at home cheering him on. Travis, we wish you all the best of luck. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge Lino and Shirley Perlow, who for 27 years have owned and operated Perlow's Tyres in South Lismore. They bought the business in 1997, and it's a family affair. Their daughter Jo worked with Lino in the tyre shop, and as a true family business, Lino and Shirley's second daughter, Debbie, also joined the staff in 2006. Lino and Shirley have also been heavily involved in the community at the Otello Club, holding many board positions, running events and cooking and in the kitchen cooking pastas. Lino and Shirley recently sold Perlo's ties to another local family, Tony and Kelly Millard, and their children Sophie, Matt and Brad will also be involved in the business. Lino and Shirley are also looking forward to spending more time with their family, Kylie, Joe, Peter, Debbie, Andrew, Fiona and Todd, and grandkids Hunter, Sienna, Tom, Gina, Amy, Tate and Ruby. Congratulations, Lino and Shirley, for the service you've done for our community, and I hope it's a retirement well earned and well spent.
And in accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I call the clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 1, 5th annual statement on veterans and their families.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to reflect on the Minister for Veterans Affairs annual statement and say at the outset to any veterans or Australian Defence Force personnel listening to our broadcast, thank you for your service. And thank you also to the families and the friends who support you in that service to our nation. And as the previous minister, who was directly responsible for most of the reforms spoken about in the ministerial statement, I want to direct my comments today to the ongoing process of reform and the optimistic and positive quest for change which defined my team's time in that role. Deputy Speaker, at the outset, I want to make one simple point which is often lost in the public debate about military service and our veteran community. We have a well-led, world-class, highly respected, well-trained and incredibly capable Australian Defence Force. We should be proud of them. Our capability edge is our people. Sure, we need to keep investing in the equipment to allow them to undertake their task, but it is their skills and the training they receive which sets them apart. Whether it's during conflicts or peacekeeping missions or humanitarian aid and disaster relief, they are well prepared and well equipped to do the job they do on behalf of our nation. They are all volunteers. They choose to serve in uniform, and in return we owe them the best conditions of service we can provide, every effort to ensure their physical and mental well-being, and an opportunity to transition successfully to civilian life. And overwhelmingly, Deputy Speaker, that is exactly what happens. They train well, they serve well, they transition well, and they should be justifiably proud of their service and ready to take on new challenges in their lives. But, Deputy Speaker, it is a job with inherent risks of death and injuries. And as the Veterans Covenant states, for what they have done, this we will do. As a grateful nation, we are obliged to support our veterans when they need it. That's why, Deputy Speaker, I started saying thank you for your service 3 years ago. It's a reminder to us all. I started saying thank you for your service at every public event, not to embarrass Australian Defence Force personnel or veterans, but to remind those of us who haven't served about the risks that are taken on our behalf. You keep us safe in an ever-changing world. You are the first people we turn to when the job gets too big for local or state agencies. And as a civilian, it's been an extraordinary privilege to see you training and deploying both at home and abroad. Thank you for allowing me to spend time with you and witness the pride, the passion and the teamwork you exhibit every day. So, Deputy Speaker, if I have any advice for our Australian Defence Force personnel, it is simply this. Start preparing for your transition to civilian life earlier in your careers. No one stays in the Navy, the Army or the Air Force forever, and finding a new sense of purpose, a new mission, a new role in our society after your military service is critically important for your well-being. The risk of injury means your career could end prematurely, and it's why the new Joint Transition Task Force is so important to get right. We have let people slip through the cracks. We have had service personnel who weren't properly supported during transition, and we know in this place that we have to do better. That was my personal challenge, Deputy Speaker, as the former minister, to work in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs, ex-service organisations and the community to do better every day. And on a small moment of personal indulgence, it was incredibly humbling to be contacted my last week in the job by people who were publicly making the case for me to stay as minister. Now, in reality, Of course, they weren't asking for me to stay. They wanted the stability, and they were largely happy with the direction we were taking as a team and as a government. We changed lives, we saved lives, we had more to do, but that is the nature of politics in our country. And I use the term "we" quite deliberately. You achieve nothing in politics, you achieve nothing in this place as an individual. There's an old African proverb, Deputy Speaker, which I'm sure you're aware of. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So in my relationship with DVA and my own staff, my own office staff, we worked incredibly well together. Sadly, Deputy Speaker, the feedback I've received from stakeholders in recent months is disappointing. The new ministerial office is not engaging with the ex-service community or the department in a constructive way, and that's to the detriment of our veterans and their families. So I urge the new ministerial office to become team players. From my experience, I was extremely well supported by loyal and capable staff, along with the outstanding leadership team at the Department of Veterans Affairs and the ex-service community itself, all trying to work together to achieve positive changes. Of course, Deputy Speaker, we had many differences from time to time, but I was in no doubt that the ex-service community was working constructively to try and make a difference. And the same can be said for the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Liz Cosson. Liz brought her own years of military experience to every policy conversation, and she added her own unique passion, empathy and respect for our veteran community and their families. We would not have achieved any of the reforms outlined in the ministerial statement yesterday without Ms Cosson and her executive staff, without her helping my office to shape public policy, and without her advocating so strongly through the ERC process for budget bids to succeed to secure additional resources for every veteran in this country. In that same vein, Deputy Speaker, I wouldn't have known what to even ask for if I hadn't sat down, listened to the department, listened to peak bodies like the Ex-Service Organisations Roundtable, listened to the Repatriation Commissioner, listened to the Veterans Family Advocate, listened to the Defence Engagement Commissioner, and learnt from the leaders of a wide range of veterans groups and their families, learnt from their experience, learnt from their judgment, and respected their opinions. As a government, Deputy Speaker, we have invested heavily in veterans' employment and transition services while boosting mental health care and developing a network of wellbeing centres. There's so much more to be done in this space. The new Minister's office needs to work with our MPs on both sides of the House, with the existing service providers, and back in the organisations which are already making a difference on the ground. Deputy Speaker, on a separate note, our decision as a government, with support from the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Treasurer, to include a question on veterans in the census will help us inform our future decisions on where our services need to be located, and that data gathering is a breakthrough, and sharing that information with the states is vital. As our government, our introduction of the Veterans Recognition Package and the Australian Defence Veterans Covenant, along with the redevelopment of the Australian War Memorial, will help define how we respect and remember our service personnel in the future. Importantly, Deputy Speaker, the new Sufferings of War public art installation will also help families dealing with the grief of lost loved ones, and I thank the people who worked with me and worked so constructively on such a harrowing and emotionally charged issue. It will be an important piece of artwork, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Chief of the Defence Force for agreeing to fund this work and for not forcing the families to fundraise from other sources. I've reported several times before in this place, Deputy Speaker, that as a renowned dog lover, the successful introduction of the Psychiatric Assistance Dogs program is one of my proudest achievements in that portfolio. I've met with veterans who have received a dog. It has been a life-changing experience for them. We now need to broaden our minds in this place and look at other innovative treatments, things like equine therapy and heart therapy. There was resistance at first to the dog program, but we overcome that, and I think being more innovative in future in how we deal with PTSD will be important for our veterans community. Finally, Deputy Speaker, the Royal Commission started this week, and it's a chance to unite our defence and veterans community. It's important that we tell the good stories and the bad stories. It's important that we continue to learn from any mistakes. We must give our veterans and their families the hope and the confidence that support is available to them, and there are pathways to good health, and that we are working in partnership in this place to achieve the best possible outcomes for them. It's so important that we don't feed into a vicious media cycle of despondency, desperation and helplessness. So, as a backbencher Deputy Speaker, I want to see this coalition government continue to maintain the momentum for reform and to build on all the good work we've done while the Royal Commission runs its course. I will continue to promote positive stories and messages of hope for our ADF personnel and our veterans, notwithstanding the very real challenges and the difficulties some may face. As a government and a grateful nation, we must support those who need our help. But at the same time, we must promote the many achievements of our veteran community. And on that note, Deputy Speaker, I take the opportunity to thank the staff at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I thank the staff and the volunteers of the ex-service organisations. I thank the families and the friends of serving men and women, and I thank all the people in this place who are working in a bipartisan and constructive way to make a difference. We really have come a long way together, but there's more to be done, Deputy Speaker, together.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I want to start how the former Veterans Minister, the member for Gippsland, finished, and that is by thanking the hard-working staff at the Department of Veterans Affairs and by thanking all of those members of our ex-service organisations that give so much love and support to our veterans and their families, whether you're in a paid role, but particularly the volunteers. Our nation owes you a great gratitude, not only in many cases as they are veterans for their service, but for their willingness to help others. And I'm pleased to have this opportunity to rise and to speak about veterans and their families. And one of the principal reasons that I'm in this place, as I'm sure other members who have served are, is to improve the lot of our veterans and their families, looking after our veterans and their families. So I listened with great interest to the Minister's statement. I don't think it has helped that he's the 6th Minister for Veterans Affairs over 8 long years in this government. Personally, I would have preferred that the member for Gippsland continued in that role and we were able to make some more gains. It's not a slight to the current minister, it's just there's something to be said for continuity, although I think he can improve a number of things, and that's why I'm here and happy to help. We need that consistency, I think, and there are many examples of where those opposite, the government, can do better. The Minister told us he's determined to address the high rates of suicide amongst the ADF and the veteran community, and of course that is something that we all want to ensure happens. And we know that there's suicide prevention trials underway. In May this year, the government announced that the National Suicide Prevention Trial, 12 national sites, would be funded for another year of operation and transition. $1 million for each site over financial year 21-22. But those opposite, of course, good at announcing things, but not a dollar, Madam Deputy Speaker, not a dollar has been received. It's been announced and not received, so it would be good if that was done as soon as possible. And of course, it is a truism to say, we can't rewrite history, it's a truism to say that those opposite the current federal government fought against the establishment of a Royal Commission into defence and suicide for a long time. And it took the veterans community and it took federal Labor working with those of like mind that knew how desperate the situation was, and it was well past time for the fullest and broadest and highest level of inquiry in order to stop this scourge. So it is a shame that it took so long. I know there has been a lot of trepidation among the veterans community about it. But one thing I'm hearing overwhelmingly now is I now understand, from those who are sceptical I should say, I now understand because veterans
and their families and their advocates have got a chance to tell their story. And that's very, very important. And through the telling of those stories, the themes about where our patriot Australian men and women have fallen through the gaps will become evident, and we'll be able to fix the system in a systemic way, which obviously is what we're after. I am concerned that there is a lack of trust in the government, given that they fought so hard against this Royal Commission. But if they do not cover it up, and if they have an opportunity in government, hopefully, obviously, I hope that Federal Labor forms the next federal government and implements the recommendations. But if it is those opposite, then they need to respect the recommendations and crack on. Now, when it comes to supporting specific mental health for those mental health needs for those participating in the Royal Commission, I can give a suggestions coming from veterans who are there and present. Is that it's bringing up difficult issues, as we always knew it would, and there are mental health supports there during the day, but a phone number for after hours probably doesn't cut it. And if there were mental health professionals that were available where the hearings are taking place that can be accessed for a face-to-face consultation, then that is the feedback from the veterans there, that would be good. Now, speaking of those that are attending the Royal Commission hearings in Brisbane at the moment, I want to give some feedback direct to the House from evidence from some of those that are there. And I'll read an excerpt from former Major Michael Stone, who I served with in Timor-Leste and who is doing great things for veterans with his not-for-profit now. Based out of Queensland, but before COVID, taking veterans into Timor and now doing it on a lovely beach down in Queensland. So thank you for your service, Mick, and for your great words to the Royal Commission, and in a totally apolitical and non-bipartisan way. I want the House to learn from them. And he said, and I quote, "Who will a veteran trust to encourage them, motivate them, understand them, love them and call them out? To empower them, to take responsibility, accountability and to do the hard work it takes to get well and stay well." We, as in his organisation, have evidence and methodology that it's veterans, especially veterans with lived experience and their partners with lived experience, who can do this difficult work. Military operations have multiple dimensions of exposure to violence, human suffering and government policy. It should be no surprise that the moral burden of overseas missions and wars executed on behalf of the Australian people and ordered by the Australian government are left with the Australian veteran to process and their families to absorb the impacts. It is hard to acknowledge, to talk about. He later goes on to say, and I quote, "The veteran is the embodiment of the best of us as a nation. Those that join the Defence Forces are vetted prior to joining for their mental acuity, psychological stability, health, motivation and physical fitness. On joining, they are above average in every statistic. On departure, they are above average in the worst of statistics. Like all people, we veterans have our problems, but we can be empowered to be part of the solution. We can significantly contribute to prevention, early intervention and postvention. A paradigm shift for everyone involved, from a focus on sickness to a focus on promoting wellness, will significantly reduce suicide in defence and the veteran community." End quote. So I just wanted to share that with honourable members and with the House, because that is just one example on one day of one hearing where you're hearing straight from veterans that they want to actively be part of the solutions, and they have been doing the hard work to make sure that they've also evaluated the effectiveness of what they're doing to help their fellow brothers and sisters. So I just want to associate myself as a veteran with what Mick said there. There are many examples I could give the House of veterans, fine Australians, who have become injured either on operations or during training, and I will give the House some more examples soon in another speech. But suffice to say that the finest of Australians are serving our country proudly. The least that we can do is to make sure that they've got every support. So the great hope of all honourable members, I'm sure, is that whilst this Royal Commission goes on, we support people as best we can, and that when we get those recommendations, we do the best that we can to implement them in the interests of our fellow Australians.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Charles Province once wrote, "It is the soldier, not the minister, who has given us freedom of religion. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier, not the campus organiser, who has given us freedom to protest. It is the soldier, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It is the soldier, not the politician, who has given us the right to vote. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag, who allows the protester to burn the flag." You could replace the word soldier with somebody who serves in the Air Force. You could replace the term soldier with somebody who serves in the Navy. We should be very proud of the Royal Australian Air Force, the Royal Australian Navy and the Australian Army. I acknowledge the member for Solomon, and I acknowledge his service in uniform. I acknowledge all those who have served, and for those who have served and who are now doing it tough, there is help available. Open Arms, Veterans and Families Counselling Service, 1800 011 046, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Safe Zone Support, 1800 142 072, is a free and anonymous counselling line for current serving Australian Defence Force personnel, veterans and their families. And when you call that number, it is up to the caller how much or little personal information that they share. Madam Deputy Speaker, recently on the ABC's Q&A program, Afghanistan veteran Daniel Kieran, VC, who was given that honour after his efforts in the Battle of Derapet on 24 August 2010, had this to say: "I was there for the men and women to the left and to the right of me on the ground. It's as simple as that. I went, they went. We served our country, the government of the day. I have no questions at all why we went, or no issues for why we went across there. At the start of the program, you know, I said that I fought beside the Afghan National Army as well. For me, it was absolutely about human rights. You know, those friends that I have or had whilst I was in country, the Afghan National Army, you know, for me, it was about creating a better tomorrow for them." So yes, there was a number of issues throughout, that's without a doubt. I'm, for one, who's been in combat situations like that every step that you could take could be your last. I'm not going to sit here and question some of the decisions that were made, but let's be honest, mistakes were made. Indeed, Daniel is right. I have the utmost respect for him. I have the utmost respect for all of those who served in that conflict, the longest conflict that Australian services have been engaged in. We lost 41 of our best and bravest. I pay tribute to the former Veterans Affairs Minister, the member for Gippsland, who we heard from earlier. I pay tribute to him because he listened. He cared, he had empathy, and I know in the service that he did between 2018 and 2021, it meant a lot of difference for those veterans. And I also pay tribute to his staff, as well as to Liz Cosson, AM at CSC, the Secretary of the Department, a Major General no less. She was the first female Major General in the Army when she was given that great honour in 2017. And I know that her and her department, the Department of Veterans Affairs, go out of their way, as they should, to do everything that they can for our veterans. No one always gets it right, and there are those who, sadly and unfortunately, slip through the cracks. Many veterans in Australia are not in contact with DVA. As at June 2019, there were more than 290,000 Department of Veterans Affairs beneficiaries in receipt of pensions, allowances and treatments or pharmaceuticals. This includes this number about 184,000 veterans and 110,000 dependents. But many veterans in Australia are not in contact with DVA. In 2017, DVA estimated contact with 1 in 3 veterans who had served since Vietnam and 1 in 5 veterans who had served since 1999. DVA estimated there are about 631,800 living Australian veterans who have ever served in the ADF, either full-time or in the reserves, at June 30, 2019. And so to that end, I was very pleased that a question about service, about military service, was included in the recent census. I thought that was very important. That was very timely. And hopefully that will enable some of those veterans who, either for whatever reason, either their own choosing or just perhaps something that went wrong with an initial DVA contact that went astray, that they can, if they so desire, get the support and the assistance that they need. I'm proud to hail from Wagga Wagga. It's the only inland regional city with all 3 military services represented: Army, Air Force, and, even though we are many hundreds of kilometres from the nearest drop of seawater, Navy. And I'm very proud of that fact. And if you serve in the Air Force for any given length of time, you end up at Forest Hill. And the home of the soldier at Kapooka is the proud training base for all recruits who go through and who do their initial 12-week training before they are sent to the far-flung corners of the nation, indeed perhaps who knows what corner of the globe, to serve in the khaki, a tradition that stretches back to Gallipoli and even before that. I am a former Veterans Affairs Minister of Defence Personnel. I'm also a former Assistant Minister for Defence, and I'm proud of those portfolios and the sort of work that I was able to do in my limited time in those areas, work that was continued and enhanced and improved upon by the member for Gippsland. And I listened carefully to the member for Solomon and as well to the former Veterans Affairs Minister when they mentioned and talked about the current Defence and Veteran Royal Commission sitting in Brisbane, and it will be elsewhere in the nation. I'm very pleased to say that it is coming to Wagga Wagga. I know that it's going to Townsville. It's important that it has that regional outreach, particularly in towns and centres where there is a high military presence, an ex-military presence, because many military people actually retire to the places in which they are familiar, because whilst they are serving, they form great friendships, they form great networks, and they feel comfortable in those places. The government established the Royal Commission on 8 July 2021. I know there will be some very sad stories coming out of that. I know there will be some evidence given and some personal tales told that will shock the nation. And I would urge and encourage those people who want to contribute to that process to do just that, and either in person or via other means. But tell your story. tell your issues and your concerns, because we need change, we need reform, and this is one way that we will achieve just that. Mr Speaker, some $11.7 billion in federal funding supports more than 325,000 veterans and their families each year across the board, and the 2021-22 federal budget included an additional $702.6 million with a focus on wellness support, suicide prevention and ensuring the DVA is appropriately resourced, as it should be. As it should be. There will be mistakes made, but that is why I urge and encourage those veterans to reach out to the department, even if they've had an experience that was perhaps not of their liking or wish in previous times. Please reach out, please ask for support if you need it, and if you have a contribution to make to the Royal Commission, then please try to do just that, because we do need the change, and it'll only be from that evidence and those submissions that we can in fact do that. And finally, thank you for your service to all veterans and to all current serving personnel.
I thank the member for Riverina. The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Cowper.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And first and foremost, I would like to acknowledge and thank all our past and present ADF members. Thank you for your service. We wouldn't have our freedoms that we have today but for you. And I'd also like to extend that thanks to the families, because you make great sacrifice, allowing your family members to serve in the ADF and continue to support them once they have left the ADF. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the former ADF Minister, the member for Gippsland. I know the member for Gippsland very well and saw him and the work that he did over the past few years that I have been here. One thing I can say is that he had empathy for ADF members, and he did as much as he possibly could in his role. And I saw that. I saw that he came up to my electorate on 2 occasions and met with the veterans organisations, many veterans organisations in my electorate. We have one of the highest cohorts of veterans in Cowper. And that empathy shone through. And if there was an issue that was raised at that time, he would, and his department and his staff, and thank you to his staff, would address that problem with immediacy. So I would like to thank the former Minister for the role that he undertook and the work that he did. Deputy Speaker, one thing that he said quite often in the past was that not all ADF veterans are broken, but when they are and when they're struggling, we have an obligation to those who served us and as an indebted nation to support the lifetime well-being of these men and women. And we have an obligation to continue to encourage and ensure that they not only speak up, but they're heard, that we actually listen. And we need to consistently do this. And that, I think, has been the problem in the past. We have to provide a level of support and advocacy that extends not to just them, but also, importantly, to their families. And in that regard, I am pleased to say that the federal government has invested $11.7 billion in funding up to the 336,000 ex-service personnel and their family members. But one of the most important parts of this, and something that I'm working with the veteran community in my electorate, is more than 40 million of that is to establish the veteran wellbeing centres across Australia, and there's currently 6 of them, $5 million per centre. Previously, the services were spread out everywhere, but now those new centres are better targeted to the needs of the veterans and the families in the local communities. These services include the health and wellbeing employment, training, housing, etc., entrepreneurial pathways and volunteering opportunities under the one roof. And that is the secret, under the one roof, so the veterans know where to go. They might not know what to do, but they know where to go, and that's the start. That's the most important thing. One thing that the former minister, member for Gippsland, did refer to was the veteran support dogs. I met with a veteran the other day, and seriously, he was like a kid waiting for Christmas because it was only a matter of days until his puppy turned up, and he was so excited. And it was self-fulfilling. He knew that this puppy was going to make him happy, to help him get through the day. It might be a very small initiative, but something that makes such a huge difference to the life of one person. And I made him promise that he would bring the puppy in when he got it. As I said, Deputy Speaker, in my electorate, I've been working closely with the veterans' organisations to have our own hub and spoke. We're after $5 million, but that's not for one, that's for 4 hub and spokes. And it will make the world of difference to those very many veterans in my electorate. In that regard, I would like to thank Richard Callaway, Stephen Sawtell and Pat McGann, veteran advocates, but also others involved, Justin Poppleton, Louise Freeban, Peter Bruce and Sean Berquist and Bill Wagner for the work that they are doing to help our veterans. That's such important work. They get paid a pittance and do the work of 1,000 men. They really do. The Royal Commission, if I could just address that very quickly. I could not think of a better appointment than Nick Caldis to the chair as the Royal Commissioner for the Royal Commission. I know Nick Caldis well. He had 35 years in the New South Wales Police Force and retired as Assistant Commissioner. He is a man of real life experience. He's had real hands-on experience. It might not be at war, but it is an experience that veterans would understand and appreciate, that this is a common man, a decent man, and a man who can empathise with them because of that experience. He hasn't come, and I know no disrespect to those who graduate university, go straight into a chamber and become senior counsel and do well and are appointed as commissioners. He hasn't come through that way. He's come through the hands-on, the hard, real-life experience. He was in the homicide squad, lead detective for Samantha Knight and many other high-profile cases, Seth Gonzalez and John Newman. He would have had that experience to talk to the families, to empathise with the families, which is exactly what he's doing now through this Royal Commission. He was a negotiator for 10 years. We've already seen through social media, through reports from people who have listened to him in the short time the Commission has been going, that the veterans can see this as a man who will make a difference. And I have no doubt that he will make a real difference to the lives of those who will give that very, very difficult evidence, who will tell those very hard stories. And I cannot imagine for any moment, my heart goes out to those mums and dads having 2 teenage children now, that they would go off to war and come back from war only to lose their lives because of what they saw. It is unimaginable. So I know that the Commissioner will listen to you, you will be heard, and changes will be made. But, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I acknowledge the work that needs to be done for our ex-servicemen and women. There is a vast chasm between what is happening now and what needs to be done. But we are taking a bipartisan approach. We all want this. We all want this to be resolved, to have a better process for our ADF personnel when they do return home. And it is always very difficult, whether you spend 5, 10, 15 or 20 years in any service, whether it's the ADF or the police or the AMBOs, fireys. In a way, you become institutionalised, and it does become very difficult. But those who become institutionalised need to have that support when they leave those services. So, to echo the sentiments of our Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence personnel, they have given us their best, and in return, it is only right that we give them our best. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Cowper, and I call the member for Sturt.
I move the debate be adjourned.
The question is that the debate be adjourned. All those in favour say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I call the clerk.
A committee and delegation business order of the day number 1, report of the Standing Committee on Health, Aged Care and Sport, resumption of debate.
The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today in recognition that better health for all Australians is key in our development and success as a country. And I'd like to thank all the members of the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Health, Aged Care and Sport for their report entitled The New Frontier, Delivering Better Health for All Australians. I extend a special thanks to the member for North Sydney for his work in chairing this inquiry, and to the Deputy Chair, Mr Deputy Speaker, the member for Macarthur, who, as a paediatrician, along with me, is a former brother-in-arms on the front line of healthcare.
Thank you.
Alongside the Secretariat supporting the committee, the member for North Sydney and the member for Macarthur have overseen the development of 31 recommendations to ensure the best opportunity for health for everyone in Australia. And I'm very delighted that I was asked to be a supplementary member of the committee, and indeed has been a very bipartisan committee and a great experience. Truly something to be recognised in this parliament of actually progressing outcomes for all Australians. So thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for your participation, and thank you for allowing me to participate as well. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that indeed most Australians know that Australia enjoys one of the best health systems of any country. And Medicare sits at the foundation of our health system, and combined with private health insurance and primary health networks, form a strong foundational framework of healthcare that delivers for the benefits of all Australians as part of a universal healthcare system. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, all levels of government are involved in the running of our system, and it is clear that it is a successful system. In fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, as an outcome, Australia ranks 8th in the world for life expectancy. By and large, metrics of health rank Australia in the top 10 worldwide, and in fact some metrics have us as at number 2. But of course, there is always more that we can do, and we can never be satisfied. We must always strive for better. It's the least we can do for all Australians. So that is why I'm very delighted, Mr Deputy Speaker, with the New Frontier report, which has made numerous recommendations towards ensuring that the system works better for all Australians. Each of these 31 recommendations were considered and developed in light of current challenges in the health sector, with tangible benefits from the adoption of these recommendations for all. Some recommendations that I'd like to highlight include the following. The first one is Recommendation 1, that the committee calls for the establishment of a Centre for Precision Medicine and Rare Diseases. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, as you know, I was a professor at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which began life as the Birth Defects Institute, the Murdoch Birth Defects Institute. It is a preeminent medical research institute that specialises in both genetics and stem cell research. And so it is with great pleasure, actually, that this recommendation will help, if implemented by the Minister, will increase the ability of the Department of Health to provide Australians with access to breakthrough drugs and novel medical technologies, particularly for children with rare diseases, because as you and I know as paediatricians, there's often very little hope for these children. And we're currently in the House debating Maeve's Law, a very important law reform that may offer new hope to people who have this very rare genetic condition through the mitochondria. So it's great to see that there would be potentially a centre that would focus on new technologies of precision medicine and for rare diseases. On top of this, the proposed centre would provide a comprehensive horizon scanning unit for the aforementioned drugs and technology supporting patients. And this centre will be well served to advise the Department of Health as well as Medical Research Advisory Board. Recommendation 3 is another recommendation I'm particularly proud of, and that is that the committee recommends the creation of an Office of Clinical Evaluation within the Department of Health. This office would evaluate both pharmacological and non-pharmacological interventions, as well as establishing a living evidence function that ensures health assessment is informed by the most up-to-date and accurate data. We all know, having been through COVID, how important knowing what the most recent tests and diagnostic therapeutics, diagnostic as well as therapeutics is for the care of patients. And so the opportunity for research to be in a living evidence function would be useful to Australia, having an external horizon scanning so that we can connect with countries overseas. I will say as an aside, Mr Deputy Speaker, that you and I know that medical types in Australia do keep up internationally through international medical conferences. And Australians are great travellers, but health professionals in Australia, particularly doctors and medical researchers, are fantastic travellers. And that has actually served us well as a sort of subterranean global health diplomacy in this country. And you and I know, as both being members of the National Health COVID Response Committee, that there is a lot of gathering of data across jurisdictions by the health professionals in this country that feed into this NHMRC-supported committee and provide evidence for the government and for policy within this country. But it would be great to have an Office of Clinical Evaluation that does this on a constant basis, not just in the period that we face when we look at a health pandemic such as we are having. So by gathering this information and then sharing with state and territory governments, the proposed office would ensure the continuity of best quality and most effective treatment. Mr Deputy Speaker, in my role as co-chair of the newly formed Parliamentary Friends of MedTech, I'm particularly pleased by a number of recommendations that pertain to the emergence of new medical technology that will help ensure Australian patients get fast and efficient access to the best available devices and digital products as and when they emerge. And many people watching this will absolutely understand that one medtech that has been of great benefit to all Australians is telehealth, a form of digital interaction with clinicians, which means you don't need to travel through congested inner cities, or you don't have to travel long distances in rural and remote parts of Australia. You can get access to scripts or to review appointments at the drop of a phone call or video conference. So we know these new technologies, which Australia has been on the forefront of developing, are really something that we want to make sure that we can bring to market more quickly and bring through the regulatory process more efficiently. To this effect, the Committee Recommendation 19 suggests reforms, particularly to one part of the medtech sector, and that is the prosthesis list, by firstly addressing the lack of coverage for non-implantable devices under the current arrangements, and secondly ensuring that there is improved coordination between the Medical Services Advisory Committee and the Prosthesis List Advisory Committee to provide faster access for patients. Further, the new Frontier report recommended that the Independent Health Technology Assessment Review reassess relevant aspects of the health technology assessment process to ensure there are future pathways for treatments and therapies that do not fit neatly into the current system, such as for rare cancers, antimicrobials, orphan drugs and precision medicines. Mr Deputy Speaker, as a paediatrician, I would emphasise that it's imperative that appropriate clear pathways are considered for inclusion for paediatric medicines and technologies. The committee was of the clear view that precision medicine approval pathways will require a different application assessment than current approaches designed for treatments for common conditions with large data sets and comparative evaluations. Finally, with regards to MedTech, the committee recommended the Department of Health introduce an equivalent to the managed access programs for medical devices. The report recommended the details of this scheme, including eligibility criteria and duration, should be formulated in consultation with patient groups, clinicians and industries. Recommendation 21, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know is one of particular interest to you and of course to me, where the committee calls for the standardisation of newborn screening across Australia. And about time too, I would say. On top of this, an expansion of the newborn screening program in light of the increased understanding of genomic testing, and we know that genomic research, again from the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, but also the Garvan Institute, is preeminent here in Australia, and we should take advantage of that, not just for our patients and for Australians, but also for the business opportunities that this provides to Australian businesses. Preventative health care is immensely important to me, considering my background in paediatrics, and accurately screening our youngest Australians is crucial to make sure that we can detect those early conditions as early as possible to give them the best possible chance for a good start to life. Mr Deputy Speaker, the committee's recommendation for increased patient voice is something I see as paramount for moving forward. The committee implores the Department of Health to bring patient voice up front into the health technology assessment system. This includes representation of peak patient bodies in the system, refreshing every 3 to 5 years, and particularly importantly, we did as a committee recognise that there was a dearth of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as voices with regards to particularly medicines that may have particular specialty in their particular situation. So I'm very pleased that we have identified this as a gap in our healthcare system. We know that they experience everything and we need to make sure that patient voice is pivotal to improving our healthcare services in general. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, Australia's health system is oft lauded as one of the best in the world, but complacency and satisfaction will not improve the lives of Australians in the health system. We must continue to deliver better health for all Australians. This, indeed, is a time for the new frontier, and COVID has focused that more now than ever. By looking at this part of the health technology delivery of Australia, this will help give every Australian the opportunity for better health. I commend this report to the House. Thank you.
I thank the member for Higgins. I thank her for her kind words and for her efforts on the committee. And the question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Dobell.
Deputy Speaker, I'd like to also start by acknowledging the Chair, the member for North Sydney, and yourself as Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee of Health, Aged Care and Sport for your work throughout this inquiry. In fact, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been invited as a supplementary member to join the inquiry, so personally, thank you. And to the committee members, including the member for Macon and the member for Moncrief, for making myself and the member for Higgins welcome as supplementary members for the inquiry. Deputy Speaker, as others have said, there is no doubt Australia has one of the best healthcare systems in the world, underpinned by Medicare and the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, and designed to provide quality, safe and affordable healthcare to all Australians. But we have much more to do. As COVID-19 has shown, the further you live outside of a big city, the more vulnerable you are. The worse your quality of life is likely to be, especially if you're living with chronic disease. Acute shortages of healthcare workers and higher out-of-pocket costs are leading to longer waiting times and poorer health outcomes for the 7 million Australians living in regional and remote Australia. Deputy Speaker, in the time I have today to speak on the report, I'm going to focus on those areas of affordability and access, particularly around medicines, as a pharmacist of over 20 years. And I know that community pharmacies play a vital role in our healthcare system. There are almost 6,000 community pharmacies across Australia. And in communities outside big cities, pharmacies are often the only place where locals can seek healthcare, where they can walk in without an appointment and get quality, up-to-date information and advice. In fact, in some 70 towns in Australia that are without GPs or other allied health support, pharmacists and pharmacies are the only healthcare available. Deputy Speaker, pharmacists, as you know, are some of the most trusted healthcare professionals in the world, but they're facing serious challenges when it comes to caring for and supporting their communities and their patients. We often talk about patient-centred care. I think there is a big gap between the rhetoric and the reality, particularly for the most vulnerable people and especially those living outside of big cities. The last 2 years have been particularly tough, with the COVID-19 pandemic causing global supply chain disruptions and local outages in many communities. I remember a parent talking to me about not being able to get infant Panadol for their child and being very concerned about what they might be able to do to make sure that their child was safe and well. I had people talk to me about not being able to access Ventolin inhalers and asking, well, if I see my GP and I get a prescription, am I more likely to be able to get a Ventolin inhaler than if I go in and ask over the counter? These are essential medicines, vital for Australians. And what COVID-19 exposed was, in a well-designed healthcare system, the vulnerabilities, particularly in global supply chains, leading to local outages. This has made it harder for Australians, as I've mentioned, particularly for those 7 million Australians living outside of big cities in regional and remote communities across Australia, to access life-saving medicines that they both need and deserve. This has been seen in hospital settings, where there's already were problems before COVID-19, but where those vulnerabilities have been further exposed, where there's been outages in common routine day-to-day medicines that put patients at risk. And a key recommendation of this report has been around the supply of of medicines on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. We must, all of us, make sure that medicines, particularly new medicines, are always universally affordable for all Australians, wherever they live, or whatever they earn. It is so important, and I want to reference now some of the remarks of the Pharmacy Guild of Australia as part of the inquiry which led to this report. The Pharmacy Guild of Australia made a submission where they spoke about the cost of new medicines, particularly to the community. They said, and I quote, "New medicines are likely to be highly specialised and have the potential to be significantly more expensive than anything currently available on the market. For small businesses like community pharmacies, this presents a serious cash flow problem and a risk to business." It is really important that we make sure that community pharmacies, those almost 6,000 community pharmacies across Australia, are able to provide medicines affordably to their communities, especially the most vulnerable. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare's latest report, just over 1 in 20 Australian adults, or 6.6% of the population, delayed or avoided filling a prescription because of the cost. I've heard from community pharmacists who have had patients come into their pharmacy with a bundle of prescriptions and, with a trolley of groceries, almost apologetic that they've bought essential groceries that they need, when they're trying to decide which prescription to get filled. I've had parents say to me, can I get one bottle, or can I get one of the antibiotics filled and share it between the two children? Or can I have this, which medicine, can I take this every second day? So that I can help to stretch that 1 month prescription last 2 months. This shouldn't happen in a wealthy country like Australia. Australians shouldn't be forced into that position where they're having to decide which medicines they can skip or which script they can avoid or delay filling. That shouldn't happen in Australia, because that is a risk to the individual, and it's also a risk to our healthcare system and to our economy. It's bad for patients and it's bad for the economy. In the Hunter, New England and Central Coast region, New South Wales, which is a community that I represent, that number of people avoiding or delaying scripts was higher, as it is outside of big cities, 6.8%. And the high cost of medicines, as I mentioned, is forcing people to delay or avoid seeking treatment and care. And it's bad for their health, it's bad for our healthcare system, and it's bad for the economy. Pharmacists are also calling for adequate training prior to any new medicine or novel technology coming onto the market, so they can provide the most up-to-date and effective advice to their patients. This is vital, and as I said before, pharmacists are some of the most trusted and relied upon healthcare professionals in our community, and they're well placed to support patients who need highly specialised medicines and new and evolving therapies. But they need to be properly supported with timely access to the most up-to-date and evidence-based information to protect the health and best interests of their patients. There's also a need to address remuneration, and I've spoken about this before, Deputy Speaker. Pharmacists were asked early to put in expressions of interest to be part of the COVID-19 pandemic response. Because of the way that the vaccines were rolled out, many pharmacists and pharmacies weren't able to participate into the vaccine rollout until June, was the earliest that pharmacists were able to participate. And now we're seeing that Pfizer has been recognised as a universal booster. Pharmacists are being paid $16 a jab. There's 27 different requirements that they have to comply with in order to be able to provide a jab. And what I've heard is that, reluctantly, some pharmacists feel that they won't be able to continue to participate in the vaccine rollout. And when state and territory governments are standing down mass vaccination centres and vaccine hubs and relying on the network of GPs and pharmacies across Australia, I don't know how they can justify the remuneration for pharmacies, and it's a big concern to me. The current arrangements don't reflect the costs associated with ordering, handling, dispensing these vaccines, and it needs to be properly addressed. In the time I have left, Deputy Speaker. I would like to put my full support for pharmacists and other allied healthcare workers to be properly supported in the work that they do. It's essential that all healthcare professionals are able to work to the full scope of their practice to make sure that all Australians can get proper healthcare, especially those Australians living outside of major cities. As the Pharmacy Guild has said in their submission, pharmacies are often presented with very little incentive to stock or be involved in supplying high-cost or specialist medicines, and this must change so that all Australians can access the care they need. As the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia said in their submission, Australia has a strong track record in the regulation of therapeutic goods underpinned by an evidence-based framework, as well as timely and cost-effective considerations around access to and subsidisation of medicines and therapies for patients. Deputy Speaker, as I said at the beginning, Australia has one of the most highly regarded healthcare systems in the world, underpinned by Medicare and the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. And this has been a bipartisan inquiry, but it can't go without mentioning that those were two Labor initiatives. And as I know, the first time I met you, Deputy Speaker, and you said to me, and this is why you're in this place, you said to me, I will not end my medical career as I started it without Medicare. And I think that is so important to all Australians, that we have universal healthcare to everyone, wherever they're born, grow, live or grow old. And I think that's something that this report has underscored, that need to make sure that all Australians have access to quality, affordable healthcare. I commend the report to the House, and I'd like to again thank you, Deputy Speaker, for your work and that of the Chair, the member for North Sydney, the member for Moncrieff and the member for Macon, and the member for Oxley who couldn't be here today. Thank you.
Thanks. I thank the member for Dobell for her efforts on the committee and for her kind words. The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I do agree with the member for Dobell that it is important that all Australians have access to affordable health care, and Medicare is not going anywhere, so I'm very pleased to be able to stand in the Federation Chamber in this place and speak on this report called The New Frontier, Delivering Better Health for All Australians, which is why many of us are here. We want to be able to see that ongoing for Australians, that there is affordable and accessible health care for those who can't afford it. And it's worked very well having half private, half public, just like schooling. Deputy Speaker, half private, half public works very, very well. And of course, we've heard the great Liberal leader John Howard many times iterate that. Now, can I first acknowledge the Chair, the member for North Sydney, and the Deputy Chair, Deputy Speaker, member for Macarthur, my colleagues, the member for Higgins, member for Reid, the member for Dobell, of course, member for Oxley and Macon for their inputs into this very, very special and important inquiry. The report looks at opportunities to deliver better healthcare for Australians through our regulatory and health technology assessment process for both medicines and technologies. As outlined in the Chair's forward, at its heart are the needs of patients, the Australians who are born with or acquire conditions, many of which have so far eluded highly effective treatments, and that's why this inquiry was undertaken for the future of those Australians who face those health difficulties. And it is very challenging. We all have health challenges in our lifetimes. Very few of us get through, actually, our lives without some kind of health challenge. And so it was very important to me personally to be part of this inquiry with my colleagues who did such a good job, and it was a bipartisan effort, Mr Deputy Speaker, as you're very aware. But everything in this report is about those Australians with rare medical conditions especially, and those Australians who may require novel drug and treatment technologies, and those Australians who indeed, sometimes in their darkest hour, need hope for moving forward. And Australia has one of the best health systems in the world, as we've heard members from both sides of this chamber acknowledge. Our success in protecting Australians during a global pandemic is the latest evidence, Mr Deputy Chair, of both the strength of our healthcare system and the quality and dedication of all of those who work in the health sector. And can I take the opportunity to thank you, if you work in the healthcare sector, for the work that you've done, particularly over this last 22 months and moving forward into next year. let's compare Australia's record of, sadly, 2,000 deaths during this pandemic, and of course each one a tragedy, each one belonging to a family, perhaps a father or an uncle or a son or a daughter, each one tragic. But when we compare to our record versus other countries around the world, for example, the United States with 750,000 lives lost, each one, again, tragic. The ripple effect of all of those family members who have been affected by that. Our country has indeed done very well. And of course, innovation is happening at a very fast pace. Governments have a duty to ensure that Australians continue to have access quickly to medicines and medical technology, and that our health systems facilitate that outcome rather than hinder it. And Australians can also benefit by being at the forefront of innovation through clinical trials, Mr Deputy Speaker, and a strong domestic research, development and manufacturing capacity. Some of these comments were made by the chair of this particular committee, a member for North Sydney. And in 2019, can I say more than 95,000 Australians participated in clinical trials, which saw the commencement of approximately 1,880 trials, which employs 8,000 Australians. And I speak of this because it's particularly relevant in my electorate of Moncrieff. The Gold Coast clinical trial sector is an emerging, rapidly growing sector with well-established demand drivers, including ageing, diverse and rapid population growth. But the Gold Coast is actually the largest regional city in the country for delivery of clinical trials, experiencing 32% growth and employing approximately 44,000 people. So that's significant, and it is a growing sector, emerging sector indeed, on the Gold Coast. And an example of an emerging technology in Moncrieff is that of Dr Hal Rice, who I've spoken about before in this chamber, but he deserves a few moments just to talk about his achievements in terms of surgery on brain aneurysm. And what Dr Rice does is robotically perform surgery on brain aneurysm, and also he has a 3D printer where he prints out the actual aneurysm that a person has had, so the stroke, the blood clot in the brain, and then his medical students are able to rehearse on that 3D model of the aneurysm. And so this indeed saves lives, and virtually every time I invite Dr Rice to anything, he has to rush off and scuttle off to save another life. And so I thank him for the work that he does out of the ADAPT Centre at Griffith University, which is my alma mater. So I'm very proud of the growing clinical trial and growing medtech and biotech sectors at the Health and Knowledge Precinct at Griffith University in Southport. And so recommendation 17 of the report actually outlines that the Australian government establish a scheme that supports the domestic medical technology sector, similar to the Food and Drug Administration's Breakthrough Devices program in the United States. And so, of course, I support that because it will support that growing sector on the Gold Coast. I can't talk to all the recommendations because time does fly in the chamber, but I will just talk quickly about recommendation 1, which is the Australian government establish a centre for precision medicine and rare diseases within the Department of Health. And this would enable a dedicated centre for rare diseases and a way forward for those who need access to drugs and technology to treat and perhaps cure their conditions. And the Department of Health's capacity should be enhanced to provide Australians with timely access to new drugs and novel medical technologies, including for rare diseases, and health technology assessment, or known as HTA processes. And the government's research agenda should align with this outcome. And this was part of recommendation 1, that this centre should also provide advice to the Department of Health and the Australian Medical Research Advisory Board on research priorities. Again, a fantastic recommendation. It should provide education and training information, including support for patients and a comprehensive horizon scanning unit for new medicines and novel medical technologies. And the committee has further recommended that the centre should provide advice to governments on the establishment of a dedicated regulatory HTA assessment pathway, HTA pathway for cell and gene technologies in consultation with state and territory governments, industry, patients and other relevant stakeholders. And it should regularly provide advice to government on the effectiveness of those pathways and areas for further reform. And so this particular report had 31 recommendations, Mr Deputy Chair, and I encourage those at home to go to the Health, Aged Care and Sport website, from the APH website, and download the report. Have a good read of the work that the committee has undertaken. I thank committee members for the bipartisan way in which we approach this for the future health of the Australian population, and particularly those Australians, and we heard from many of those patient advocacy groups, Deputy Chair, around the country. Our thoughts are with you if you're battling a rare disease or indeed are unwell at this time. Our thoughts are with you, and we're working for you, the Australian people, to assist in Australians' healthcare for the future. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
I thank the member for Moncrieff and for her excellent work on the committee. The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Layla.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, firstly, I want to congratulate you as the Deputy Chair, and of course the member for Sydney, and all the members that we've heard from today who are on the committee. But I'll be brief, because my contribution today is an acknowledgement of someone who was not on the committee, but someone whom the committee heard from. I want to draw the attention of the House to the story of one of my constituents who I've spoken about prior to this report in this House. And I want to congratulate the committee on the bipartisan report, The New Frontier. In the middle of this year, I was contacted by the amazing Sue Santaro. Sue wanted to contact me on behalf of the Save Our Sons campaign to provide local anecdotal examples about her family's story with muscular dystrophy. Sue Santaro has 3 grandsons, Anthony, Jacob and Lucas, who have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. A few days prior to the meeting, Sue rang to tell me the deeply sad, tragic news that her beautiful grandson Lucas had unexpectedly passed away. But this determined grandmother, with indescribable grief, didn't cancel the meeting because it was too important for her to have the opportunity to speak for the boys in her family and boys like her grandchildren all over the country to her local MP. Because she understands that we in this place need to understand their needs and their hopes. She used her grief as inspiration to pursue clinical trials on gene therapy. I promised Sue that I would assist her in any way I could to help her make life a little easier for Anthony and Jacob and boys like them across the nation. That's why I'm speaking today on this report. Sue also met the member for Macarthur, who I also want to thank for his dedication generally, but his work in this place on a report like this. While this report speaks to a range of ways to modernise how we treat illnesses and disease, I'm really wanting to speak on Sue's behalf today. As the member for Macarthur pointed out in the tabling of this report, one of the most important things that's come out of the report is the importance of patient-centred care and the importance of a cooperative and a collaborative approach to healthcare. And as we heard the member for Higgins reference this afternoon, the prioritising of patient voice in our health space and in our decision-making. The report discusses evolving genetic treatments for fatal disorders such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the very treatment for which Sue is fighting so hard. And I want to echo the member for Macarthur's words of how wonderful this treatment could be in a way forward to curing the illness. The report really does provide a pathway of how we in this place develop our health policies and approach treatments in a modernised way. And I would welcome the report's call for a centre for rare diseases. Deputy Speaker, circumstances, hardship and a desire to act create heroes of ordinary people. And that's what Sue is. She is such a hero. I want to congratulate the committee, but thank people around the nation like Sue, whose voices do shape the way we act in this place on such important issues. And I would finish by saying that it is an incredibly strange thing to do, to sit with someone like Sue and hear their story. And in the moment with that person, you know that you want to do everything to help them. But it's sad that in our health system at the moment, or that when we're making decisions, We're relying on those voices to come to us rather than having a system where that kind of advocacy is not required. None of that, however, do I say to limit the power of the advocacy of Sue and grandmothers and grandfathers and mums and dads and patients all around the country. I again want to congratulate the committee and again reiterate to Sue through the chair that she will always be front of mind when it comes to how I'll approach these issues, and I hope she had the same impact on members of the committee. Thank you.
I'd now call the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the member for Lalor for her contribution to this debate, because it very much reminds me of so much of what we heard in the course of the inquiry, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But can I also begin by acknowledging and thanking both the Chair and Deputy Chair, who I believe showed tremendous leadership in steering this inquiry and ultimately putting together the recommendations that are now before us, which, although they number 31, in reality there's probably over 100 sub-recommendations that arise from that. And they are all recommendations which go to changes that I believe that will ultimately make our health system here in Australia not only better, but indeed one of the best in the world. I also thank all of those who assisted and participated in this inquiry, and I'm referring to the health department officials, industry sectors, researchers, health professionals from both hospitals and universities, and the patient voices. And this is where I come back to the comments of the member for Lalor. The patients and families who highlighted to the committee their everyday struggles and frustrations with the health and medical system that they interact with on a daily basis. The committee heard their stories and the importance of both this inquiry and the urgency of adopting the recommendations. We heard their heartfelt pleas, as just recounted by the member for Lalor when she recounted Sue's story, about how the system could and should be changed to try and support those families who each and every day struggle with illnesses and diseases, particularly when it concerns younger members of their families, that I believe that a country like Australia could do more to help with than we currently do. And I think it was those impassionate pleas that have certainly shaped and guided the committee in coming to the conclusions and recommendations that it did. Mr Deputy Speaker, medical science is advancing at a rapid pace. And I think that is well accepted, just like all science seems to be moving so quickly. Personalised and precision medicine, underpinned by genomic testing, is changing for the better medical treatment in Australia and around the world. But our system, our regulatory system, and I'm referring to departments such as the TGA, ATAGI, the MSAC, PBAC, the Medical Benefits Schedule and so on, as well as they have served us for many, many years, also need to change at the same pace. They need to keep pace with the rate of change in medical science, because if they don't, then we start falling behind. And that is in fact what this inquiry, I believe, revealed. It revealed that whereas medical advances are moving at such a rapid pace, it still appears that it takes too long for some of the new technology or medicines to become available to the broader community. And in looking at those delays, the reality is that with each day of delay, it adds considerably to the suffering and to the costs and sometimes even the shortening of life for those people who would benefit from the new technology that is being worked on. And I accept, and I would be the first to say that we should not rush medicines and medical equipment through so quickly that it creates a risk in any way to patients. But the reality is that today we are developing new medical technology at a rapid pace, and it is developed in a way that it can be assessed much more quickly than it has been. And in the course of the inquiry, we heard time and time again from applicants, from industry sectors, from medical researchers about those lengthy delays, sometimes which run into years. And years of delay undoubtedly make a world of difference to the quality of life of the people who will ultimately benefit from that particular medical product coming to market. And it's interesting that with just about all of the different submissions we heard of with respect to delays, in the end, the product that was being delayed got to market. In the end, it was proven to be to meet all of our standards, and in the end, it was proven to be something that should have and could have been made available a lot earlier. And had it been, then those people who relied on it, those people who were going to benefit from it, would have been able to do so much, much earlier. And as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, at times we're talking about a person's life, where the delay of the medicine could have made a difference to whether the person lived or not. And certainly it would make a world of difference as to both whether the person lives a better life and whether they can afford to indeed pay for all of the medical services that they require, which is in itself another issue, because one of the things that was made very clear from the inquiry is that what we don't seem to do is properly value different new medical technology. We don't have health economists in this country that are able to give you a holistic value of a particular product. And sometimes we simply look at the bottom line, but we don't look at all the costs that would otherwise be saved if that product was made available earlier and at a cheaper price. And so things like that need to be factored into the medical services of this country. One of the things that particularly concerned me was that we often, in fact too often, do not support medicines and new technology that is being researched for rare conditions, or where we have a smaller research firm looking at something, because if it's a rare condition, obviously the market for the product is not going to be great, and the investment required sometimes simply doesn't justify it. Not because it won't work, but simply because the money and effort that is required in the research itself won't be returned to the researchers, even if the product is approved. And given the delays and the costs of applications, many a time the researchers simply don't give it the priority they need to. The same with small research companies, who quite often have a great idea, have done some terrific research, but the cost to them are prohibitive of taking their product through the system and to market. And again, in those cases, the real losers are the people that would have benefited, who are obviously struggling day by day because of the health condition that research would have targeted. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think we can do better with respect to those smaller research companies and the rare conditions, and that is one of the things that I think we ought to be trying to focus on. Obviously, listening to the patient groups also impacted on the committee's final assessment of what we could and should be doing. Patient groups are not given a strong enough voice in the approval system that we currently have, and I believe that they need to be. And in fact, even the approval systems need to adapt to the point whereby, when applications are being assessed, the professionals that are making those assessments are in tune with the latest technology. And if that means bringing on specialist people into different sector or different parts of the approval process, then so be it, because we do have some very good professionals in this country who are absolute experts in their field, and we should be drawing on them and their advice when a product relating to their field is being brought to market. Mr Deputy Speaker, one of the things that also concerned me, and I'm pleased that the recommendations go to some of this as well, is the very fee structure that we have in place. And one of the concerns that was raised by so many is that if an applicant doesn't get approved on the first round, then the reapplication fees can be exorbitant. And there were applicants who actually just simply didn't proceed on that basis. We need to have a sliding scale of fees where, once an application has been dealt with, the subsequent applications, given the work that's already gone into the first assessment, could be a lot lower, and they should be. And we should also have a system in place, and the recommendations will also go to this, whereby applicants who simply don't have the money are able to, perhaps a bit like our university HECS fees system, repay the money once they start making a profit from the product. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'll finish on this. The recommendations, I think, are comprehensive. I hope that future governments take this report seriously, because a lot of good work went into it. I hope the report doesn't simply sit on shelves collecting dust, because if it does, people in Australia will simply continue to suffer unnecessarily, because medical products that could have been brought to market early are simply not doing that.
I thank the member for Macon. I call the member for Sturt.
I move the debate be adjourned.
All of those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Against? I think the ayes have it. I call the member for Sturt.
Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move that order of the day number 2 be postponed until a later hour this day.
Is leave granted? I think the member for Adelaide. Leave is granted.
Sir, I move order of the day number 2 be postponed until a later hour this day.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? I thank the member for Wentworth. The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. I call the clerk.
Government business order of the day number 2, grievance debate.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Coringamore.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, failing to act on matters of significance for Australians seems to be a Morrison government speciality. The full impacts of 2 such failures are now impacting people in my electorate and many others across the nation. Deputy Speaker, Australia is in the midst of a severe timber shortage and, as a result, a housing industry shortage. Timber suppliers and building industry managers across my region are calling the timber shortage a national crisis that will have significant knock-on impacts for jobs and for the economy. But the Morrison government is doing little to fix it. In essence, the building industry is struggling to get essential timber products such as roof trusses for their housing builds. Delivery delays for roof trusses in my electorate are already out to 8 months or more. The timber shortage will continue to send timber prices and the cost of housing through the roof. That's placing huge stress on the building industry and on mum and dad home builders, the ones who've struggled to scrape the funds together to enter the housing market. Building companies are financially stretched and jobs are under threat. The current spate of building company collapses are in large part due to material shortages. Shortages mean jobs don't get done, people can't get paid, so there's a cash flow crisis. Dreams of would-be homeowners are being shattered, whilst others are seeing their homes left unfinished as their building company collapses. This is leaving small subbies and tradies in the lurch, often owed large sums of money when companies go under. My office is hearing tragic stories from people caught in this nightmare of having all their savings tied up in a half-built house that may never be finished. The stress of pending financial ruin, the fear of not having a place for their family to live in, the legal mire to sort through to get answers from liquidators are very real for these people. It's a crisis that has been long time in the making and one which this government should have foreseen and moved to mitigate or alleviate. And it's not going to end any time soon. According to one of the nation's leading prefab manufacturers, Timber Truss, based in my region in Geelong, construction is a huge driver of the local economy in my electorate and in other areas of the nation. The construction industry in the Geelong regional economy accounts for about 9,700 jobs within the city of Greater Geelong, 1,350 in Surf Coast Shire and 500 in the Golden Plains Shire. Currently, we still import around 35% of our timber from overseas, bringing it long haul from Canada, Finland and other countries like Czechoslovakia. Sourcing timber from overseas is costing between 85% to 125% more, and this is inevitably being passed on to the builder, leading to a concerning increase in the cost of housing. And it's not only about cost, it's adding significantly to our carbon footprint when the timber industry should be contributing significantly to carbon retention, as would happen if we had a sizable national timber plantation estate. Currently, there's only 2,750 hectares of new plantations of softwood nationally. Yet we need 400,000 new hectares of plantations, Deputy Speaker, by 2030, just to meet future demand. The Morrison-Joyce government promised to meet a $1 billion plantation trees target in 2018. But they have failed to deliver, doing next to nothing on this promise. In fact, a concessional loan program set up to help meet the 1 billion tree target is yet to even open. An amount of $500 million was promised before the last election towards this target. Once again, hollow words. A recent joint report by Master Builders Australia and the Australian Forest Product Association says Australia's timber shortage will escalate. By 2035, the nation will be short 250,000 home frames. That's the equivalent of the housing stock in the cities of Greater Geelong and Newcastle combined. The flow-on impacts for apprentices, local carpenters, electricians, roofers and plumbers and the related retail sector is already being felt. I'm seriously concerned that our nation is in the early stages of what looks like to be a long-term crisis with potentially huge economic ramifications. That's why I've recently called for an inquiry and national task force to be set up to develop a national supply chain and sovereign capability to address Australia's timber supply crisis. The Morrison government has yet again dropped the ball on this issue that is so crucial for my region's jobs, for the local economy and for this nation's economy. The Coalition claims to be good financial managers, but this doesn't seem to add up to me. Deputy Speaker, I would now like to turn to another Morrison government failure in the telecommunications industry. This is a significant issue in my electorate. Despite being next to Victoria's second largest city of Geelong, there are abysmal connectivity problems. Pockets of my electorate don't have any connectivity. Good connectivity is essential in the modern world. If we didn't know that prior to the pandemic, we certainly know it now. How can it be that just a few kilometres from my electorate office in the suburbs around Geelong, Bellarine and Surf Coast, who have to rely on the oldest version of antiquated ADSL dial-up technology for their data communications? Now their telco is talking about phasing out ADSL in their peri-urban area, and they live in fear they'll be left with no data communication, no option other than expensive and time-limited satellite. There has to be adequate upgrade plans and affordable pathways for regional or remote Australians who are using ADSL before their services are discontinued. Then there's the NBN, or the lack of it, which is so frustrating for so many. One couple, Mary and David in my electorate, live on a small rural allotment, not much more than a stone's throw from massive urban growth development. They can't get the NBN, and only occasionally, if they're lucky, do they get mobile reception. Even in the Geelong suburb of Armstrong Creek in my electorate, one of the fastest growing urban areas in Australia, connectivity is poor. After getting many complaints about poor or non-existing mobile coverage and frequent dropouts, I held a virtual community meeting to better scope the problem. Often people can only get coverage out the front door of their house or in one particular room. Sometimes whole streets seem to be dead zones for mobile reception. And for many people, it's more than simply frustrating. It's a matter of life and death. I know of people with severe medical conditions unable to call for help. Some of them were on my Zoom, and I can tell you it was exceptionally emotional listening to people in tears. It's a Morrison government failure. The government should have long ago mandated robust requirements for telcos to provide mobile services in new urban communities. Then there's the recent storms across my electorate and more widely across Victoria, which exposed the vulnerability and inadequacy of the mobile network during emergencies. Many mobile towers have totally inadequate battery backup or other emergency power options. Now, we know the government has rolled out a second-class slow NBN to the nation, largely based on copper wire to the home. Now it's Labor that will deliver the full fibre to the home, super-fast NBN that this government should have delivered many years ago in the first place. Labor has pledged to invest $2.4 billion across the nation so that 90% of the fixed line services, more than 10 million premises, will have world-class gigabyte speed by 2025. And I can tell you my community is very pleased about that. We need better planning, stronger minimum service guarantees and performance benchmarks and oversights for the telecommunication industry. Thank you.
The question is that grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, I think the events of the past week have shown us the important role that government can play in people's lives in protecting Australians' health and protecting their security. And I think there have been a number of events where, to my mind, the government has responded quickly and rapidly and effectively to external shocks which in other countries or in other situations would have posed a real threat to our way of life. In Melanesia, in the near Pacific, the southwest of the Pacific, in Solomon Islands, we've seen, unfortunately, an outbreak of unrest there, which is not uncommon in the Solomon Islands, and it's often between the two major islands, Guadalcanal and Malaysia. And again, this has been triggered recently, but thankfully we have been able to respond very quickly. And I know there's now 45 Australian Federal Police and 76 members of the ADF who've already arrived in the Solomon Islands in support of an existing presence we've already got there. And I did want to thank those who've deployed and their families, employed by and large from the member for Herbert seat from Townsville. And they are a rapid reaction force. They're on a short time frame in terms of notice to move to deal with exactly these sorts of contingencies. When this last happened in 2003, Australia didn't have the agreements in place to respond, or indeed the capabilities to respond as quickly as we would have liked. And what we then had to do is send in a much bigger mission, Ramsay, the regional assistance mission to the Solomon Islands, which had to stay for much longer. Today we've been able to move much more quickly to stabilise the situation there. We've also seen the emergence of a new COVID variant named Omicron, after one of the letters in the Greek alphabet. And all the indications are, at least in South Africa and Botswana, where this has originated, that this variant is much more contagious or spreads much more easily than other variants. It's quickly beginning to displace the Delta variant and the Alpha variant in South Africa. It's not yet clear whether this variant is any more lethal or any more dangerous to human health, and it's not yet clear whether but it's expected that vaccines will continue to remain effective against Omicron. But yet again, the government has acted very quickly here. We've suspended flights from South Africa and 8 neighbouring southern African countries. We've put in place quarantine arrangements for any Australians or permanent residents returning from those places. And we've also instituted genomic sequencing and testing for those small number of people who've tested positive for this variant who've arrived in Australia. Now, the nature of these sorts of infectious diseases is they don't actually have in an evolutionary sense, they don't have an incentive to kill their host. They have an incentive to replicate quickly, but to keep their host alive. And it may well be that Omicron, whilst it's a more contagious variant, may well be a less lethal variant, which is what has happened over time with things like the common cold and the flu. The severity has lessened and the ubiquity has grown. Now, we don't yet know in the case with Omicron, and it's important that we act conservatively and take precautions as we're doing here. This week in Parliament, we've also been debating, and the committee I chair, the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, has also been debating the first implementing arrangement under the AUKUS agreement. Now, members will be aware that this is an arrangement between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom, which will allow us to acquire nuclear-powered submarines in addition to cooperate in other areas. And I cannot overstate the importance of this capability in a country that faces the strategic circumstances Australia faces. Nuclear-powered submarines will be a game-changer for our capability. They can operate with greater range, with greater endurance, with less ability to be detected, higher lethality and higher speeds as well. And to show or demonstrate the closeness of this relationship, this is only the second time in the United States' history that it has shared or been shown it's so willing to share nuclear propulsion technology with another country. The first time was with the United Kingdom in the 1950s. This is the second time with Australia. And this week, my committee, the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, has been reviewing the implementing arrangement which allows for the exchange or sharing of naval nuclear propulsion information, classified and unclassified, to allow us to conduct the feasibility studies we need to do to determine the optimal pathway. If you look at our performance through the pandemic, which again is a key purpose of government, Deputy Speaker, and we've been reminded of that with this new variant outbreak, I think you'd have to say that whilst challenges remain, we are in a very good position in Australia. Our vaccination rate, we've got over 86% of the over 16 population fully vaccinated. We've got over 92% who've now had their first dose. In my own state of New South Wales, which has moved more quickly with the vaccination programs, partly because of the outbreak and the lockdown earlier this year, 92.4% of the over 16 population is fully vaccinated. 94.5% have now had their first dose. And what this means, Deputy Speaker, is we will end up with one of the highest vaccination rates of any developed or advanced, or indeed any country in the world, in a very short space of time. And that will provide a level of protection to our public against new variants. There's also boosters now available. People are now receiving their booster shots, and there are many more vaccines in the pipeline as well. If you look at our economy, ours is one of the few economies that is larger now than it was going into the pandemic. We've got 900,000 more jobs than we had in May last year. We've got more people in employment, and we've got an economy that's larger. And in fact, some of the biggest economic challenges we're facing now are ones on the supply side rather than the demand side. We've got a scarcity of labour. We've got many industries that are crying out for workers because our borders have been shut, but there's no shortage of consumer demand, and we've seen that in the consumer confidence figures, in the business confidence figures as well. So again here, I think our economy in Australia is the envy of much of the Western world. And if you look at how we've travelled in disease terms through this pandemic, in the United States, over 12% of people, that's about 1 in 8, have had COVID. In the United Kingdom, it's about 11%, or around 1 in 9. Now, many of those have recovered, many sadly have not, but many of those will suffer from the effects, which are still not very well understood, of what's called long COVID, enduring symptoms of things like fatigue, compromised cardiac function, inability to concentrate, general lethargy as well. In Australia, the figure is 0.4% of people who've had COVID, so that's 1 in 250 people. It's a fraction of what we've seen in other countries, and that's a testament to the public health measures we've been able to put in place to protect people from COVID. If we had something like the comparable death rates we've seen in OECD countries, we would have experienced about 30,000 deaths from COVID here in Australia. Instead, we're at around 2,000 deaths. Many of those, or all of those indeed, are tragedies. But compared to where we were with the rest of the world, I think we are in a very good place. Lastly, I'll just mention our digital media reforms, which were announced this week. These are new laws which we propose to introduce soon to combat trolling on online media. I think anyone who's been on digital media, and unfortunately our jobs often require us to do just that, and anyone who's engaged in these worlds, or anyone who's a parent who's got children who are on digital platforms and use it to connect, cannot but be appalled at the level of bullying and abuse and viciousness that accompanies some of the activity on social media. And I think we all know intuitively a large part of it is because people hide behind the cloak of anonymity. People feel liberated to say things they would never dare to say to someone to their face, or they wouldn't even think to say if they were encountering someone in the street or a restaurant. But instead on social media, they often feel they have the licence to do so because their identity can be masked. Well, what our legislation will do will compel the digital media platforms to unmask the identity of these people and so discourage them from engaging in this sort of behaviour. And if the digital media platforms refuse to do so, they themselves will be held liable for the content when and where it's defamatory. Now, Deputy Speaker, I'm reminded of a proverb I used to hear when I travelled to Africa in my previous role when I was a government official with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And any time you go to a think tank meeting in Africa or meet with government ministries there, or you'd be at a strategic dialogue, they'd always wheel out a saying, and I think it's familiar to many people here as well. And the saying was this: if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. Well, I think that proverb is a good illustration of what a government is all about. When you're in the parliament here, to get things done, you need to operate as a team. If you want to pass legislation through the House of Representatives, you need to convince 75 of your colleagues to support you. It's quite easy to go fast, that is to yell and to criticise and to offer solutions, but it's very hard to go far, because to go far you need to go together. It means you need to cooperate with people, and ultimately, Deputy Speaker, government is about delivering for our communities. It's about keeping people safe, it's about giving people the opportunities to educate themselves, to engage in livelihoods, to run their own businesses, and it's about giving them and protecting their freedom to make their own life choices. Government isn't about telling how people they should live their lives or deciding what choices they should be making. Government is an enabling function to allow people to make those choices for themselves. So, Deputy Speaker, I think we've been reminded of that this week, and the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, is something I keep firmly in my mind.
The question is, the grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Every second day, the Prime Minister comes into this place, comes before a camera and says that his #1 priority is to keep Australians safe. And yet he is spectacularly failing in that duty by pouring fuel on the climate fire, by using our money, public money, and giving it to big gas corporations to open up new fields and pipelines. Floods are building up from the Great Dividing Range in Queensland and New South Wales and heading down to the ocean as we speak, and at the same time the government has released a gas plan to open up 4 giant new basins with 11 new and expanded gas pipelines. Now, this plan isn't for Australian homes and businesses. It is for their corporate donors. There's enough gas in the dwindling supplies of the Bass Strait to last us as we undertake switching homes and businesses from gas and electricity over the decade. So if there's enough gas in the system at the moment to help us through the transition, why is the government doing this? Well, this is a plan for 3 big gas consortia exporting our gas from Gladstone, who contracted to sell way more gas than they can deliver to their customers in Asia. So the government's riding to the rescue, saying that they will detonate 4 huge climate bombs just to appease big corporations. And at the centre of their gas plan lies the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory, which the Northern Territory Labor government is opening up. The gas basins in the Northern Territory are huge. In the Northern Territory, there's the equivalent of 68 years' worth of Australia's pollution locked up there. People have heard about Adani. The Beetaloo project is much bigger and much worse for the climate than Adani. Yesterday in the Senate, we lost our chance to stop $50 million of public money flowing into the pockets of the big gas corporations that want to open up the territory to fracking. The Greens had secured the crossbench votes we needed to block public money going to these big tax-dodging corporations. The only vote we needed was the Australian Labor parties, and they went and voted with the Liberals instead. We have 2 parties who now hold identical positions. Net zero pushed out to 2050, that happy place where delay has become denial, while simultaneously opening up one of Australia's biggest ever gas fields, a climate bomb. We can't reduce emissions and increase pollution at the same time. So which one do Liberal and Labor parties actually want? Their promise of net zero made in the United Nations in Glasgow, or opening up 116 new coal and gas fields that are currently in the pipeline. At Glasgow, the world said no more coal and gas. Yet less than 3 weeks after the most important climate summit in a decade, Liberal and Labor vote to give $50 million of public money that could be going to schools and hospitals instead to open up the Beetaloo gas fields in the Northern Territory and release then a plan for 4 massive new gas fields. Gas is as dirty as coal, and Beetaloo is worse than Adani, and Beetaloo itself will drive Australia's emissions up by up to 13% a year. We're talking about getting out. We're talking about terrible 2030 targets from the government. This is lifting Australia's pollution by 13% because of how much leaks and how much is required to just convert this into liquefied natural gas. Liberal and Labor have ignored the rest of the world. They are putting a safer climate out of reach. They both back more gas in Beetaloo and Scarborough and Barossa and Galilee and Bowen basins. So much gas that this leads us to a catastrophic world of 3.5 degrees of warming. When these political parties back more gas, that means they back more fires, more floods, heat waves and droughts. If you don't have a plan to phase out coal and gas, you don't have a plan to tackle the climate crisis. Why is this happening mere weeks after Glasgow? As always, the answer is money. Because what the Liberal and Labor parties do have is a plan to protect the coal and gas corporations that they take donations from. Even when these donations don't pay any tax, they take them and then the corporations get to write the climate policy. It is time for this to end. No more handouts to these big corporations. No more public cash for coal and gas. No more paying big corporations to pollute. No more sending profits offshore tax-free like these big corporations do. No more mine approvals for mates and donors. No more cushy fossil fuel jobs for ex-politicians. The only acceptable plan is one that says no more coal and gas. The Greens won't take donations from big coal and gas. We will put the people first. We will make sure public money is spent on schools and hospitals and tackling the climate crisis. We will fight for our future. It is becoming clearer by the day that the only way to get climate action in this country is to kick this climate-denying Liberal government out and put the Greens in balance of power to push the next government to start phasing out coal and gas. Deputy Speaker, I rise to mark the UN International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The Greens recognise the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination and a future built on peace, dignity, justice and security. In Palestine, as you travel from town to town and move along crowded roads, from time to time you look across to see other faster-moving, more modern roads cutting through areas that make up the lands widely recognised as forming part of Palestine. But Palestinians are not allowed on these roads. Similarly, you visit refugee camps, as I did, where people tell you of their families forced from homes a few decades ago, from their own homes, and even though these homes are still standing in some instances kilometres away, their families were never allowed to return, and nor are the people still living in the camps. You go to universities and you hear that basic things that we take for granted here, like people being able to get to class on time, are regularly disrupted because a student coming to sit their exam have been stopped at another checkpoint and delayed for hours, a checkpoint that sits in the middle of their homeland but is not controlled by them. And as an Australian, you see water tanks on the roofs of Palestinian flats and houses and think it's about collecting falling rainwater, but then the locals tell you it is so that they can scavenge some water on the day that it's flowing to their towns, because it may not be flowing to the next day when they want may not be flowing past them the next day when they want to cook or clean, because their water system is not controlled by them. All people have the right to peace, justice and freedom, and we want to see those rights valued equally for all. But for decades, Palestinians have lived under occupation and they are denied these rights. Israelis are entitled to their own state and to live in peace and security, but so too are Palestinians. Australia should recognise Palestine and advocate meaningfully for an end to the occupation, including ceasing the expansion of settlements and ending the Gaza blockade, so that Palestinians and Israelis can live in a just and lasting peace. Peace also means supporting civil society, democracy and transparency. But a few short weeks ago, the Israeli government, a quote from here, issued a military order declaring 6 Palestinian civil society organisations in the occupied Palestinian territory to be, quote, terrorist organisations, according to Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, in a joint statement, said, quote, this decision is an alarming escalation that threatens to shut down the work of Palestine's most prominent civil society organisations. UN Special Rapporteurs issued a statement noting that the silencing the voice of the human rights advocates is not what democracy adhering to well-accepted human rights and humanitarian standards would do. We call upon the international community to defend the defenders, they said. And statements of solidarity have come from human rights organisations in Israel and from around the world. The European Union, importantly, has seen the alleged evidence and has chosen to continue to fund these organisations. Here in Australia, we support the statement signed by 70 organisations, including unions, faith legal and human rights organisations calling on the Australian government to condemn the move. As UN Special Rapporteurs and the International Commission of Jurists have said, the Israeli government should immediately review and reverse this decision. And on this day, I also note the case of Mr al-Halabi, Gaza's World Vision manager, who was arrested in 2016 and after 50 days in Israeli state detention was charged with diverting aid funding, which he strongly denies. Since he was arrested, World Vision has commissioned a forensic audit that found no evidence of diversion of funds. An investigation by Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade failed to show any evidence that the money was diverted. We support the call from UN Special Rapporteurs that Mr al-Halabi should be given a fair trial or else released immediately. Marking the International Day, I pay tribute to the sumud, or steadfast perseverance, of the Palestinian people and offer our support to get Australia to push for a just and lasting peace.
The question is that grievance has been added. I call a member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And my electorate of Ford, we have a diverse range of talented, creative, forward-thinking and hard-working people who we recently got to celebrate and acknowledge in the 2021 Logan Business Distinction Awards and the City of Logan Sporting Awards. The past 2 years have provided great challenges for our business community, with the COVID-19 pandemic resulting in the most severe global economic crisis since the Great Depression. And in April 2020, more than 1 million Australians lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero. However, Mr Deputy Speaker, with strong progress on the vaccine rollout, there has been light at the end of the tunnel, and as of March this year, Australia became the first advanced economy to have more people in employment than prior to the pandemic. We know that small business are the backbone of our economy and the key to Australia's economic recovery. This is why our small business community deserves to be celebrated. The Business Achiever Awards were originally started by the Logan Chamber of Commerce over 35 years ago. It has a tradition of being the night of nights in the Logan business and social calendar, with 15 industry category awards and 6 major awards up for grabs. It's an honour for any business to receive a nomination. This year, 6 businesses from my electorate were celebrated for their business contribution to our local community. The 2021 major award winner for inclusiveness was local Beenleigh business, the Empire Body Shop, founded in 2016. The 2021 industry category awards range over a diverse number of industries, and this year's winners include ACIPS, the White House of Waterford, My City Logan, Transit Care and Laser Tag in a Box. ACIPS is a network monitoring software company, and they took out the Technology and Innovation Award. ACIPS has developed the world's largest scaling network and infrastructure monitoring software, which services some of the most high-profile organisations across the world. ACIPS software allows network engineers to be proactive instead of firefighting and detect, analyse and rectify issues before any disruption to the business occurs. ACIPS was founded in Logan and currently operate out of a corporate office in my electorate in Tanamera. The ACIPS team has rapidly expanded over the past few months and is led by Susan Koch, the General Manager. Her husband Paul, sadly, passed away earlier this year. Along with Nick Frampton and Mark Birkinshaw, I congratulate them on the success that has seen them they've achieved over this short period of time. The Event Services category was awarded to the White House of Waterford for creating amazing dining experiences and memorable events. They have a focus on locally sourced produce, high-quality service and delicious food to serve the Logan community and strive to bring the best of Australian hospitality and cuisine to Logan. My City Logan is a news outlet that took the win for media and advertising. They strive to deliver the most comprehensive news updates and provide opportunities to advertise local businesses. My City Logan is a trusted source of everything Logan related. Whether you want to read the latest headline, catch up on local events, look for the perfect weekend food spot, a local business, or searching for good property location, they have all your needs covered. Transit Care was the winner of the For Purpose Charity and Not-for-Profits Award. They are dedicated to providing safe, reliable and professional transport to those people in the community who have difficulty getting around. Their pre-booked door-to-door service allows community members to travel to medical and social supports and appointments. They also offer fun social activities, including bus trips to interesting and beautiful locations, fitness classes, arts and craft, technology courses to foster connection, participation and inclusion. The sports category that I was the sponsor of was awarded to Laser Tag in a Box, a business who aims to provide a full day of fun and laughter and adrenaline. Laser Tag in a Box rents laser tag party gear Australia-wide right to your door. Everything you need comes in the box and provides hours of entertainment with minimal stress. It's perfect for birthday parties, sporting team celebration and youth programs. Not only do we have these amazing businesses in my electorate of Ford, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the community is also can celebrate the outstanding achievements of many representatives in the sporting arena. The City of Logan Sports Awards pay tribute to the city's elite athletes and inspirational sports people. The awards also recognise our homegrown sporting icons whose accomplishments have seen them reach the highest level in their chosen sport. And this year is no different, with another successful year for our sportsmen and women across the electorate of Ford. Logan Basketball, who are based in Shayla Park, were awarded the 2021 City of Logan Sports Awards Organisation of the Year. This award culminates in a huge year of success for Logan Basketball, both on and off the court, across various levels and programs. This is a well-deserved win for the organisation, and I commend their players, coaches, officials, volunteers, staff and the management committee for all the hard work they have put into achieving such a great night of great success. It was an honour on the night, Mr Deputy Speaker, to see Marsden State High School, with a number of both current and former students being recognised for their sporting contributions. Marsden State High School Open Boys Rugby League team won Sports Team of the Year. Ms Barler won Sports Coach of the Year and Judge's Choice, and Ms Newman took out the Sports Official of the Year. Students Losa Nuamata and Colin Gillen won Sportswoman and Sportsman of the Year, and former Marsden State High School student and Olympic gold medalist Logan Martin was honoured with the Golden Banksia Award. In addition to these many organisations, Mr Deputy Speaker, there's also the everyday clubs all around Logan who are run by volunteers who do such an outstanding effort each and every year to ensure that our kids from under 5s and under 6s all the way up to our senior teams can get out in the field and play their chosen sport. I want to congratulate and commend the businesses of Ford, together with our sporting men and women, for being honoured with these awards. They have worked hard and dedicated themselves through the tough times over the past couple of years, but they are a credit to our community for their perseverance and dedication to their business and to their chosen sports, and I congratulate them all.
Thank the member for the question is that grievance has been noted, and I call the member for Hotham.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, one of the most important and significant communities I'm honoured to represent in this parliament is many thousands of Australians who have Vietnamese heritage. Springvale has long been the heartland for Vietnamese Victorians, and it's a place that I have lived in myself, that I have represented at a local government level, and now I have a great privilege of representing in this federal parliament. And more than 20% of the people who live in just that suburb alone in my electorate are of Vietnamese heritage. Deputy Speaker, the journey that's brought many of these families to Australia is simply an extraordinary one. Many Vietnamese Australians who I represent, either themselves or their parents or grandparents, fled Vietnam after the Civil War. Many were stuck in refugee camps within Southeast Asia for years at a time and came to Australia with nothing but the clothes on their back. And what this community has achieved in just 2 generations in our country is just incredible. And I just feel so humbled to represent people who have been able to make so much of the amazing opportunities that Australia offers. When I go around my community, it literally hums with the life of religious, of social, of professional activities that are being generated by these amazing people. Deputy Speaker, this community is supported by a number of incredible local organisations that I want to talk about. One of those is the South East Melbourne Vietnamese Association Council, called SEMVAC, which is a council that supports all of the not-for-profit organisations that support Vietnamese Australians in the region. They make an enormous contribution to social harmony, but also in providing direct service delivery through this amazing network of volunteers, of people of Vietnamese heritage themselves who reach out to people within their community to try to support and assist them. One of the areas where SEMVAC has most recently been most involved has been through the vaccination efforts, and they've done amazing work to ensure that this core part of my community is able to access the vaccine. SEMVAC is led by Loch Lam and a group of amazing committee members, and as I mentioned, this large network of volunteers. Another organisation I really want to point to is the Springvale Indo-Chinese Mutual Assistance Association, also known as SICMA, which is an organisation that we just could not do without in the local area. SICMA has been servicing the local community for 39 years now, and it's an organisation that I've really had the honour of being associated with for a long time, since I was a councillor in the city of Greater Dandenong. Their president, Bee Ha, is a force to be reckoned with. She's absolutely one of my idols, and Bee has led this organisation for a long time. They provide an unbelievable service to the people of the South East, in particular of Vietnamese origin. The Australian Vietnamese Women's Association Springvale is another wonderful organisation headed by their founder, CEO and Honorary Secretary Cam Nguyen. Cam and her family came to Australia in 1975 as refugees and founded the Vietnamese Friendly Society, which initially provided interpreting services and information about Australia to new Vietnamese refugees. And she was honoured this year as the Victorian State recipient of the award for Senior Australian of the Year, and I just found it was so well deserved. I want to mention also the Vietnamese Australian Seniors Association, Nancy Scorin, who is a dear friend of mine and a brilliant leader, and overseeing all of these organisations, the Vietnamese Council of Australia Victorian Chapter, which is so well led by Bon Nguyen and a hugely dynamic organisation right across Victoria. I just want to note how crucial these organisations have been. They are providing essential services and support throughout any time in Victoria, but just during the pandemic, Deputy Speaker, the role that these organisations have played has been so crucial. We've had a real issue in Victoria getting into communities where the first language spoken isn't English. And these organisations have been essential in ensuring that correct information's been getting out to Vietnamese families, and again making sure that people understand that the vaccines that are available are safe, and trying to help us bring vaccination rates up for these constituents of mine. Deputy Speaker, the majority of the Vietnamese Australians who I represent still feel very deep ties back to what happens in Vietnam, either because they've got friends and family there still, or just through their cultural ties. And something that's constantly raised with me as I move around my electorate is the very serious distress that a lot of Vietnamese Australians feel about the human rights crisis that's in place in Vietnam at the moment. I know a lot of Australians have probably visited Vietnam. I'm not sure if all of them are aware of the staggering differences between the political systems in Vietnam and in Australia. The very basic freedoms that we enjoy as Australians, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of association, are not guaranteed to the people of Vietnam. There is not an independent media in Vietnam, so the government controls TV, radio, newspapers and other publications. And Vietnamese citizens are not entitled to just join organisations, labour unions, political associations, human rights organisations, the way that you and I are afforded here in Australia. Now, this is not some problem of the past, which is slowly resolving over time. Indeed, Human Rights Watch recently, their most recent report said, and I quote, "Vietnam's human rights record remains dire in all areas." And what we see in so many countries like this is that the people who are persecuted the most are those who are trying to fight this system and trying to speak out for their basic freedoms. One of the things that's most concerning about the situation in Vietnam is the unfair imprisonment of a lot of these activists who are fighting for a fairer and more just society in Vietnam. The Human Rights Watch has found in 2021 alone, authorities prosecuted and imprisoned at least 31 people just for expressing opinions online that were contrary to the government's positions. Tham Dien Trang is one such person, an incredible woman, and if you've got any interest in this area, I'd really encourage you to Google and learn a bit more about this amazing person who has advocated very strongly for the rights of women and for a better Vietnamese democracy. She has been imprisoned again recently in Vietnam. She has previously been horribly violated, has been left disabled by the violence of security forces. And here is someone who doesn't get turned away because of those things. This is the strength of this activism, someone who is willing to continue to stand up and fight for what she believes in, despite the fact that she knows that she's going to face these kind of outcomes in Vietnam. Deputy Speaker, Chow Van Cam is one that I know has been raised in the Parliament before, because Chow Van Cam, of course, is an Australian of Vietnamese heritage. He is serving a 12-year prison sentence simply for expressing peaceful political beliefs in Vietnam. He was arrested, amongst other things, for being a member of a political party. Deputy Speaker, can you imagine the freedom that you and I feel to join a political party, to express the beliefs that we are entitled to express in a democracy? And in Vietnam, someone doing just that basic act can end up in prison for 12 years. I just find the bravery of these activists incredible. You know, it's one thing to see people protesting on the streets in Australia, which they are very much entitled to do. But imagine having the inner strength to do that in a country like Vietnam, where you know that you are going to get hunted down by authorities and punished for simply stating a point of view. What we know, Deputy Speaker, of course, is that the judicial system in Vietnam is not going to ensure free and fair trials for these activists, so they get detained and they are put away essentially without proper evidence. Deputy Speaker, one of the other things I need to mention that's very disturbing is the way that the Vietnamese government has restricted religious practices through legislation and different types of surveillance. The Khmer Krom Buddhist temples is a good example there, and the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam. These are churches, people expressing religious beliefs who face more or less constant surveillance and intimidation for just this basic human right. Now, in Australia, of course, we value those basic human rights. We seek to protect them here in Australia. But what I'm concerned about, Deputy Speaker, is the silence on these issues from the federal government about what's happening in Vietnam. So what has the Australian government done, faced with these incredibly serious problems in Vietnam, even which affect Australians who are in Vietnam? Essentially, they've done nothing, and that is not good enough. We hear nothing from government. We don't hear these things properly condemned. We don't hear the voice of Australians out to the world, making it really clear that these things are unacceptable. So I want to call on the federal government to stand up for human rights. We owe it to our friends in the region. And Speaker, importantly for me, we owe it to thousands of people I represent of Vietnamese heritage for whom these issues are absolutely crucial.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call a member for Bonner.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. As we come to the end of the year, I rise tonight to look back on the last 12 months. It hasn't been easy, and we've certainly faced our fair share of challenges. But with the support of our government, Australia has moved forward to secure its recovery, and now we're setting our sights on reopening to the world. Deputy Speaker, we know the best way to stay safe right now is by getting vaccinated. In Queensland, there are 76% of us now fully vaccinated. Deputy Speaker, Australia is leading the world in our response to the pandemic. We have some of the highest vaccination rates. We are one of the most prepared to deal with outbreaks and variants, and our economic recovery is unrivalled. Deputy Speaker, jobs are coming back. Unemployment nationwide is at a 12-year low. I've seen many businesses in Bonner benefiting from how we've been able to deliver for jobs. In fact, over 5,000 businesses in my electorate have taken advantage of JobKeeper since the start of the pandemic. And over the year, I've spent time visiting local businesses and their staff, from Acrobat's Badminton Espresso and Rochdale's Cache Cafe, to local Aussie manufacturers like Murray's Cyborg Dynamics Engineering and Wynnum's Couplemates Trailer Parts. Deputy Speaker, we're also reducing our emissions whilst growing our economy. We're delivering a balanced approach to achieve this through our commitment to securing our fuel sovereignty. This is happening in Bonner at the Ampol refinery in Lytton, a package securing 550 direct and local jobs. It's backed by our expanded $250 million Future Fuels Fund investment, which empowers consumers to drive the car that they want. Deputy Speaker, we're delivering for better roads, faster commutes, and making sure Australians can get home sooner and safer. We've invested a further $1 billion into road safety upgrades to save lives and a further $1 billion in local road infrastructure projects. In Bonner, long-awaited upgrades to the Lyndon Crossing are underway. I've been fighting for this upgrade since 2017, when over 7,000 locals in Bonner signed my petition to fix Lyndon Crossing. We were successful, and in 2019 our government committed $85 million to this worthy project. This month we commenced the first stage of safety upgrades to the crossing. I recently invited Assistant Minister for Road Safety and Freight Transport, Scott Buckholz, on site to see the progress made to date, and I look forward to welcoming him back when the works are complete. My electorate is home to Newnham and Wecker Road intersection, and I'm proud to have secured $12 million in funding for this project, making it safer, which will be delivered by the Brisbane City Council, with works currently underway. Our government has also allocated $14 million towards fixing the notorious Rochdale roundabout, which will improve the safety for commuters and cater for future traffic demands in this growing suburb. And there's also the $15 billion inland rail project connecting Melbourne to Brisbane. Currently, plans have it terminating at Acacia Ridge in Brisbane's southern suburbs. This means freight for the Port of Brisbane must be trucked in on existing roads unless a dedicated inland rail link is constructed. And that's why I'm fighting to deliver a dedicated underground freight rail connection between the inland rail and the Port of Brisbane. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to health, this year I have spoken in the House on multiple occasions about spinal muscular atrophy, also known as SMA, and sadly 1 in 10,000 births in Australia. With no cure, this disease is the #1 genetic cause of death for babies under 2. But Deputy Speaker, Queensland is one of the few remaining states left to include screening for SMA as part of its newborn blood spot screening program. And I've been calling on the Queensland Government to account, sharing the stories of families in my electorate whose little ones are currently battling this disease, like Kate and Grant Goff and their beautiful girl Oakley, who was diagnosed at 8 weeks old. Life-saving testing exists and has been rolled out in other states while the Queensland Government continues to stand idle. I will continue to speak up for these families because no child should be disadvantaged on where that they are born in this country. Every Australian has the right to be safe, and that's why our government remains committed to ending all forms of violence against women and children. Since we came to government, we have invested more than $1 billion to keep women safe and children safe, and this year we invested a further $1.1 billion in women's safety. I've been working closely alongside many hard-working services in our area like Karina's Beyond DV and Small Steps for Hannah Foundation, who provide dedicated support to women and children, helping them to escape violence and abuse. This year I unveiled my plan to deliver more mental health services on Bonner's Bayside. It was launched through a Bayside mental health survey which collected over 500 anonymous responses and highlighted the needs of locals. I kept up the momentum by convening the Bayside Mental Health Working Group involving local mental health and community providers. This group has since met on multiple occasions, bringing these important voices together and determining how we can fill the urgent gaps in our area. I've also shared my plans with the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, David Coleman, who has provided his support. And currently I'm working with the Brisbane South PHN on a mental health plan with the intention to be tailored to the youth of the Bayside. And this year, Bonner has celebrated the return of our iconic Wynnum Fringe Festival. Taking place over 6 jam-packed days this month, festival founder Tom Oliver has once again outdone himself. It was a true celebration of the arts, with the Morrison government proudly securing its return as an annual event by delivering $236,000 in funding. It's been another challenging year for our arts and creative sectors, but we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Deputy Speaker, we're also making a real difference to the lives of Australian families. I am regularly visiting our local childcare centres and kindergartens, spending time with the staff and children, and learning about what we can do to support them. During these visits, I always read and donate If I Was Prime Minister by Beck and Robin Finer. Last month, it was donated to the vibrant kindergarten class at C&K at St Catherine's Community Kindergarten in Wishart. The children loved the book so much that they created and sent me their own version, which told the story of what they would do if they were Prime Minister. And I also want to take this opportunity to recognise Bonner's amazing and hard-working school communities who have demonstrated this resilience once again this year. I brought Parliament House to several local schools through mock parliament, where they debated topics such as whether junk food should be served in school cafeterias and whether Brisbane should host the 2032 Olympics, which we will now be doing. Deputy Speaker, Bonner Youth Advisory Council also met each term this year, and we even kicked off junior BYAC for students in years 5 and 6. It's so exciting to see our leaders of tomorrow in action. Deputy Speaker, it's been a big year, but our government has continued to deliver across all sectors for all people in all of our communities.
There have been no further grievances. The debate is adjourned, and the resumption of the debate will be made in order for the next day of sitting. I call the member for Herbert.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
I call the member for Spence.
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those that opinion say aye. Aye. Against, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.